Viserys Targaryen rode through the bustling streets of Pentos with the sun behind him, dust drifting in soft plumes beneath the hooves of his borrowed stallion. Though he had yet to wear a true crown, he sat the saddle as if he were a king on progress. His silver-gold hair caught and twisted in the warm wind off the summer sea, his posture regal though his shoulders ached from days of sleepless worry. There was pride in him still, the proud bearing of House Targaryen, but no longer was it the brittle, desperate arrogance he had once worn like armor. Time and hardship had chiseled Viserys' nature. The slight stoop in his spine bore testament to the weight that had come to rest on his conscience, and the flame of anger that once drove him had cooled to a steadier, more discerning glow. Each scuff of the hoofbeats against Pentos's cobblestone reminded him that he was no longer the beggar king. He had lost his sister Daenerys the day she chose to join Khal Drogo in both marriage and the crossing of the Dothraki Sea. He had, in truth, lost her heart long before then, for all the rage and intimidation he had used to keep her pliant. In that old, feverish dream, he had believed himself the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, had thought that their flight from Westeros was but a brief detour. The ragged notion that he could sell his sister to the horse lords and conjure an army in return, march them back across the narrow sea, and watch the usurpers tremble had been the single, shining, driving goal of his life. But Khal Drogo's acceptance of him had been grudging at best, a courtesy extended only for Daenerys' sake. Viserys had never realized how quickly a Dothraki Khalasar could turn on an outsider, especially one who did not respect their ways. And so it had proven, in his youthful idiocy, he had gone too far. He had threatened the pregnant Daenerys in Drogo's own sacred city, Vis Dothrak, demanding the army he believed was his due. Drogo's men had seized him, forced him to his knees. But before molten gold could be poured upon his head to crown him in a savage mockery, Daenerys intervened. She had pleaded for his life. The Khal's ancient advisors had counseled death. Yet Daenerys, newly blossomed into the Khaleesi she was, had demanded that the blood of her blood spare her brother the final humiliation. She was pregnant with the stallion who mounts the world, so the Dothraki believed, and that had made her word carry weight. Drogo, wanting to please his moon of life, relented. Instead of a crown of molten gold, Viserys was exiled from the Khalasar, banished across the red wastelands with little but the clothes on his back, a waterskin, and a single horse. It was a sentence intended to be as deadly as any lash or sword stroke, but somewhere along that bleak journey, Viserys found the will to survive, if only because something inside him refused to let the Targaryen line be snuffed so cheaply. He had wandered for months through scorching dunes and shifting starlit wastes, chasing the faint promise of caravans that traveled eastward. Fortune intervened in the shape of traveling merchants bound for Qohor. Pity or curiosity led them to find an exhausted silver-haired man half buried in the dust. The merchants took him in, hesitant at first, for the smell of death hung upon him like a cloak, and nursed him back to halting strength. From there, Viserys made his way across the trade routes of Essos, traveling from Qohor to Norvos, losing his illusions as quickly as he lost weight. He had moments of bitterness so great it felt like it might choke him. He had once believed all of Essos was at his beck and call, but that dream had crumbled like so many. He was no longer the rightful king in exile, receiving cautious courtesy from magisters and princes of the free cities. Instead, he was a wretched beggar in rags, a half-mad Targaryen with no sister to sell, no wealth, no influence, and no illusions. Desperation taught him humility. There were days he sold glimpses of his Valyrian features to men who still honored the dragon blood with coin or a safe place to sleep. There were nights he nearly starved. But somewhere in this slow dance with ignominy, Viserys learned an unlikely empathy for the common folk. He had grown up in exile, but always with a certain shielded arrogance. Targaryens were meant to rule, not to beg. Yet he found that those who had nothing often shared more than he had ever managed to give when he himself had some claim to comfort. Over time, the tight knot of resentment in his heart loosened, replaced by a fierce determination that if he survived, he would do so not by bartering his sister's future or by forging blood pacts with strangers. He would do so by forging himself anew. By the time he found a final refuge in Pentos, he was changed. Magister Illyrio Mopatis, the same corpulent friend who had once hosted him and his sister, was willing to let him stay again. But Viserys sensed that their dynamic had shifted. Once, Illyrio had only bothered with Viserys because he and others had believed in the Targaryen claim's profitability. Now, with Daenerys gone and presumably thriving as the Khaleesi of a great Khalasar, that golden goose had flown. Yet Illyrio still granted him courtesy, if only out of a lingering sense of courtesy or mild amusement. Viserys accepted the hospitality, but he did so with caution. He would not again be a puppet. He was determined to find his own path. If it meant forging alliances with other magisters, bankers from Bravos, or princes from Lys, he would do so on his own terms. And so, one morning, the dawn found him riding through Pentos to meet a lesser noble from Myr, a cloth merchant of some repute who was rumored to be in need of an intermediary to settle a dispute with the authorities in Pentos. Viserys had, in his meandering travels, discovered that while many scoffed at him, they were drawn to the flame of his Targaryen name if he knew how to kindle it just right. He had quickly gleaned that the free cities valued cunning and trade more than archaic claims to old kingdoms across the sea. Yet they also appreciated symbols. A Targaryen in his prime, with the mystique of dragons in his blood, could still open certain doors. He needed to be more than an arrogant dreamer, though. He had to prove that he could negotiate, persuade, and broker deals that others could not. He reined in the horse outside a modest villa near the city's outskirts. Sweat trickled down his temple, and he patted the horse's neck to calm it. The day's heat had already settled like a smothering cloak over Pentos. A servant opened the gate with a flourish, eyeing Viserys' silver hair. That single glance still carried weight. After handing the reins off, Viserys entered a shaded courtyard filled with lemon trees and sweet-scented blossoms. There he was greeted by Moragno, a Myrish merchant lord of slender build, draped in a robe that shimmered with gold thread and azure silk. Viserys inclined his head in greeting, something the old Viserys would have scoffed at, but the new Viserys offered freely. Moragno's eyes flicked over him. "You look rather different from what I was told. The rumors say Viserys Targaryen is a wild, desperate man." He gestured for Viserys to sit across a marble-top table where chilled wine waited. "I prefer to meet men face to face before believing rumors." Viserys settled into the chair, letting himself enjoy the tangible luxury of cool stone after so many months of rough living. "Rumors are spun from the worst of truths," he said, swirling the wine in his cup. "And I was once. Perhaps. But I have learned that there is more strength in forging partnerships than in demanding tribute." Moragno lifted an eyebrow. "So you say? We shall see." He set a fold of parchment before Viserys. A faint smear of wax residue revealed a broken seal. "This is a contract from the masters of Pentos. They claim I owe tariffs on my last shipment that arrived in the city harbor. I maintain that the goods never passed through Pentoshi walls, for they were shipped directly to merchants traveling east. They demand payment nonetheless." Viserys listened, hiding his momentary uncertainty behind a thoughtful expression. He had begun to learn the intricacies of Free City's trade, but he was no expert. He took the document, skimming it, noticing the curling lines of the Pentoshi sigils and the thickness of the legal language. The gist was clear: the city was demanding tax for the goods as if they had been sold in Pentos. Moragno claimed otherwise. "Let me guess," Viserys said. "You want me to persuade the Pentoshi authorities that the shipment never landed on their soil, or if it did, the matter is not subject to the city's typical duties?" "Precisely," Moragno said, a tight smile on his lips. "It is a matter of interpreting the local laws in my favor. And Pentos, as you know, has a labyrinthine system of bribes and leverages. A Targaryen name might open the door to the right ear. The rest is negotiation. You do that for me, King Viserys," he used the title with a certain ironic tilt, "and I shall reward you handsomely. Succeed and you will have impressed me. Should that happen, I can open bigger doors for you in Myr." Viserys weighed this. Only a fool believed success was guaranteed, but it was a chance to prove his utility, and that was everything now. The Seven Kingdoms, with its Iron Throne, lay far beyond his reach. But maybe if he built a power base here in Essos, he could restore some measure of House Targaryen's dignity. It would not be the same as reclaiming the Red Keep, but the world was shifting and he had to shift with it. "I'll do it," he said, and the memory of the sullen, raging boy he had once been flickered in the back of his mind. He almost imagined that boy was screaming at him for stooping to this. But Viserys exiled the ghost. On one condition, he added, summoning a quiet confidence. "If I succeed, you will introduce me to your Myrish allies, especially among the city's councilors and admirals. I sense coming storms in Essos. Men with foresight might stand to gain if they prepare properly." Moragno eyed him for a tense moment, measuring him before exhaling. "Deal. Now go and prove yourself." And so Viserys departed, armed with only a half-formed plan and the knowledge that he would have to be cunning and also empathetic. The first place he went was not the palace of the Prince of Pentos nor the official counting house, but instead a modest street near the docks where tradesmen and harbor workers gathered at day's end to drink, gossip, and vent about city taxes. Viserys spent half a day speaking with them, wearing unassuming clothes, listening more than talking. He learned that the master of the harbor, Bieliodiegnus, had a reputation for turning a blind eye to shipments that lined his pockets. Officially, the city taxed every crate that landed on the wharf. Unofficially, deals were struck inside alleys. It was no surprise that Moranios shipped directly elsewhere story had provoked the official scribes to question whether they had missed out on their cut. By early evening, Viserys strolled into the counting house, the seat of many Pentoshi bureaucrats. There, men and women in robes of violet and silver scurried about with scrolls, ledgers, and tokens. He caught the attention of a scribe at the front desk by politely stating his name and lineage, Viserys of the House Targaryen. The name produced precisely the effect he hoped for: curiosity. The scribe, a young man with ink-stained fingers, tried to maintain composure, but his eyes flicked to Viserys' silver hair, to the proud tilt of his chin. Perhaps the scribe had never seen a Targaryen in the flesh. "How can I help you, my lord?" he asked. Viserys offered a cordial smile. "I wish to speak with the master of the harbor or any among the relevant tax authorities concerning a certain shipping matter. My associate is Moranio of Myr." The scribe gave a half-bow and scurried away to pass on the message. It did not take long for Master Bieliodiegnus to appear, fleshy around the jowls, face flushed with curiosity. He beckoned Viserys into a corner office lined with shelves of carefully labeled scrolls. They sat, and the master steepled his fingers. "A Targaryen gracing our city's counting house. We've heard stories. Some might be true," Viserys allowed, tone mild. He let silence stretch, letting the man's curiosity grow. "I come at the behest of Moranio of Myr, who finds himself in a vexing dispute. I suspect the matter can be resolved to the satisfaction of all parties." The master gave him a wary look. "Is that so? My men have reason to believe Moranio's shipment indeed touched our dock. We have evidence of sailors unloading crates at night, though official records show no taxes paid." Viserys nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible," he said, "that certain unscrupulous middlemen used Moranio's name without his knowledge. Imagine that you had to pay taxes on goods you never profited from. Surely that would not be fair. That is Moranio's position. He is, after all, a man of considerable repute in Myr. He values the good relationship between our cities." His voice stayed calm, acknowledging the possibility that wrongdoing had occurred but shifting blame to some unknown third party. He wishes to offer restitution if wrongdoing is proven, yet he also will not be made a scapegoat for men who used his name. The master's expression was calculating. "He is prepared to pay?" In some form, Viserys hedged. He leaned forward. "Master Bielio, you are a fair man, or so I've heard. You understand that men of Moranio's station might be willing to extend certain courtesies to your office, if only to smooth over misunderstandings." Now the master's eyes lit with the unmistakable gleam of avarice. Viserys had him. He needed only to push the right combination of flattery and practicality. But instead of blindly offering bribes, Viserys maintained a posture of dignity. He made it clear that Moranio was not desperate, only eager to avoid a protracted dispute. The master of the harbor, for his part, recognized that an influential Myrish merchant was worth more alive and trading regularly in Pentos than entangled in a lawsuit. So the conversation ended on a promise. Master Bielio would review the matter, speak with his scribes, and propose a fair settlement in a day or two. Viserys left, his heart fluttering with cautious triumph. This was a game, a delicate one, but he was learning the rules. In the old days, he might have raged and threatened, storming about with entitlement. Now he saw that progress was made through negotiation, through a veneer of respect. It took him 2 days of subtle back and forth, plus a few well-timed words in the ear of the master's chief scribe and a small sum of gold from Moranio's coffers, delivered quietly. At the end, the city withdrew the threat of heavy tariffs, imposing only a nominal fee that Moranio could easily afford. Viserys carried the official parchment with the city's seal back to the merchant lord with a hint of a grin. Moranio read the parchment thrice, as if he could not believe the official neatness of it. When he finally looked up, there was something like respect in his eyes. "Well done," he said. "Perhaps I underestimated you. You are no savage beggar king." Viserys dipped his head. "I aim to build a name for myself here in Essos. My claim to the Iron Throne is remote at best for now. But I've begun to see that the real path to influence lies in forging relationships among the free cities." "You spoke of bigger doors?" The Myrish merchant lord smirked. "Indeed. In a fortnight, a delegation from Myr's magisterial council will arrive in Pentos to discuss some mutual defense treaties. Tensions are growing in the disputed lands as Lys, Myr, and Tyrosh constantly vie for territory. If you wish, I can arrange an introduction. They will be very curious about a Targaryen seeking new ties. Should they find you a beneficial ally, there might be roles for you that stretch beyond petty shipping disputes. A prickle of excitement coursed through Viserys. I would be grateful. My thanks. Thank me if you succeed in impressing them, Moranion said. Then he lifted his glass in a mocking toast. To Viserys Targaryen, forging a new path. Viserys mirrored the gesture, but even as he sipped, his mind was racing with possibilities. He might never claim the Iron Throne in Westeros, but if he could weave alliances among these free cities, if he could unite them or at least carve a domain for himself, House Targaryen might be reborn in Essos. It was not the boyhood dream he once cherished, but it was a dream newly minted, carrying the gleam of opportunity, and this time he did not need to sell his sister's freedom to chase it. Thus began a slow but steady climb into the labyrinthine politics of Essos. Over the next few weeks, Viserys carefully nurtured the connections he had built. He put aside the disheveled garments of his wanderer days and dressed in crisp linen tunics of modest but well-tailored style, the better to gain acceptance among the free city's circles of influence. No longer did he posture as the king in exile, expecting others to quake at his name. Instead, he presented himself as Viserys Targaryen, a man of Valyrian lineage with a proud history who sought to make an honest living as an advisor, negotiator, and potential ally. That he had the faint aura of royalty hovering about him certainly intrigued some, while others dismissed him as a relic of a fallen dynasty. Yet he did not let scorn wound him. Each evening found him either in the company of a merchant lord or sharing wine with council members from Tyrosh or Lys who were passing through. He listened far more than he spoke, gleaning scraps of intelligence about the simmering conflicts that threatened to boil over in the disputed lands. Those lands, caught between Lys, Myr, and Tyrosh, had long been a battlefield where city-states tested each other's strength. A single spark there could ignite wars that might draw in Volantis or Pentos or even the mighty Bravos. Viserys observed the tensions with a thoughtful eye, sensing a chance that Essos might soon be in need of strong leadership or at least stable alliances. He recognized the seeds of crisis, trade routes menaced by raiders, mercenary companies swelling with sellswords hungry for plunder, city magistrates forging and breaking treaties with dizzying speed. But also he recognized an opportunity for a man with enough cunning to unify the right factions, secure key strongholds, and present himself as a stabilizing influence. The Myrish delegation arrived in Pentos precisely on schedule, with all the pomp that befit their status. They were led by a certain Magister Tobin Caleres, a tall, thin man who wore a cape dyed in swirling patterns of black and gold. With him came half a dozen advisors and a retinue of personal guards, each armed with Myrish crossbows. Viserys was introduced at a sumptuous feast hosted by Prince Adario of Pentos, one of the rotating rulers who reigned more by tradition than real power. The true power lay with the city's magisters and merchant princes. That evening, the palace's halls glowed with lantern light, curtains of shimmering silk parted to reveal a lavish buffet of spiced meats, honeyed fruits, and sweet wines. Musicians played softly in the corners, their melodies drifting amidst the polite hum of political conversation. Magister Tobin greeted Viserys with polite formality, referencing House Targaryen's Valyrian roots. Viserys responded with warmth, showing neither fawning servitude nor arrogant presumption, but a tone that hinted they were equals or at least potential allies. Over the course of the evening, they spoke of trade along the Summer Sea, Myr's need to open new markets, Pentos's interest in forging partnerships that might curb Volantene expansion. Viserys gleaned that Tobin was deeply worried about Tyrosh's new alliance with pirate enclaves who patrolled the stepstones, harassing Myrish vessels. In response, Myr was seeking to strengthen ties with Pentos, Lys, and any who might hamper Tyrosh. War, in some shape, loomed on the horizon, Tobin admitted with a tight frown. Viserys offered his assistance in forging better understanding among the cities, referencing his success in smoothing out the shipping dispute. He was, after all, carving a niche as a man who bridged differences. Over the next few days, Tobin invited Viserys to private dinners with the Myrish delegation, quizzing him about potential alliances. Where once Viserys might have spoken rashly, he now carefully measured his words. He encouraged Tobin to consider forging a broader coalition of city-states that could deter Tyrosh or at least contain them. Tobin seemed intrigued. Yet alliances are forged by leaders of substance, the Magister said pointedly. How do I know you are more than a man trading on the broken name of Targaryen? Viserys smiled wryly. You don't until I prove otherwise. Let me demonstrate. If Myr is seeking strong allies, then look to Volantis with caution, for they do not share your interest in stability unless it suits them. But Pentos, Lys, and Bravos might. Convince them that Tyrosh's aggression threatens their shipping lanes and you will have a united front. I can help make the case to Pentos, perhaps even Bravos. I have some modest contacts in the Iron Bank. The Iron Bank? Tobin interrupted, eyes flashing with interest. If they are willing to lend to Myr for a defensive fleet, that could be decisive. Viserys nodded. Exactly. But to sway them, you need an envoy who can speak from a position of neutrality. Pentos is too closely entwined with certain Bravosi rivalries. A Targaryen, though? Some among Bravos might look favorably upon the old Valyrian blood, or at least might be curious enough to hear me out. I propose I travel with your delegation to Bravos, help broker a meeting with the Iron Bank. If we succeed, Myr secures the resources for a defensive fleet or mercenaries to deter Tyrosh. If we fail, well, you lose nothing but time spent humoring my suggestion. Tobin considered, swirling his wine. It's a risk, but perhaps less of a risk than letting Tyrosh chip away at our shipping lanes. He fixed Viserys with a long stare. Agreed. I will speak to the rest of the delegation. So the plan was made. Viserys found himself packed and traveling north aboard a sleek Myrish galleass bound for Bravos, a city of endless canals and a towering titan that roared across the waves. For Viserys, it felt like each league of sea they crossed was a step further from that old self who had pinned everything on a savage Khalasar. He stared over the ship's railing at the churning green water, reflecting on how his sister had once seemed to be his only path to power. But he had grown beyond that, forging his own identity. It still stung sometimes to recall how cruel he had been to her. He prayed silently that Daenerys was safe, that perhaps one day he could find her and show her he had changed. But for now, his fate lay in forging alliances in the north of Essos. Bravos, with its fog-cloaked canals and twisting spires, welcomed them with the solemn gaze of the Titan. The Myrish delegation had rooms arranged in the Purple Harbor district, not too far from the Sea Lord's palace, but still overshadowed by the more opulent residences that lined the famed canal. Viserys marveled at Bravos' grandeur. The riddled labyrinth of waterways, the bright-faced courtesans singing from window ledges, the imposing colossus that straddled the harbor mouth, reputed to bellow a warning when enemies approached. Here, the Iron Bank reigned as a power unto itself, funding wars, toppling kings, forging destinies behind its austere granite walls. It was in the echoing chambers of the Iron Bank that Viserys faced his next test. The banker they were scheduled to meet was a severe woman named Marlena Mora, with hair the color of a raven's wing, pinned up in a neat coil. Her dark eyes flicked from Tobin to Viserys, gauging them with cool disinterest. She allowed them to present their case while scribes took notes. Tobin spoke of Myr's predicament, the risk posed by Tyroshi aggression, the potential for trade disruption. He presented it as an investment opportunity for the Iron Bank. Lend Myr the coin to build a fleet, and if Myr triumphed, the city would reward the bank handsomely with interest plus privileges in new trade outposts. Marlena Mora listened impassively. When Tobin finished, she said, "And who will guarantee this loan? Myr's finances are robust, but war can be fickle. If Tyrosh proves victorious, we stand to lose everything. The Iron Bank is not in the habit of bestowing coin out of charity. We want certainty." Viserys ventured a step forward, cloak trailing across the marble floor. Certainty in war is elusive, yet consider that if Tyrosh upends Myr, it may then use its expanded power to threaten Lys or even Pentos, further destabilizing Essos. That chaos is bad for trade, and thus for the Iron Bank. Investing in Myr's stability is akin to ensuring Essos' largest markets remain open. He paused. Moreover, Myr has allies. Pentos is leaning in favor of mutual defense. Lys has incentives to keep Tyrosh in check. There is talk of Bravos providing diplomatic support. This is not Myr fighting alone. With your backing, Myr's coalition can win decisively, ensuring prosperity for all, and a tidy return for the Iron Bank. Marilena's eyes darted to him. And who are you exactly to speak of such coalitions? I see a silver-haired man in Myrish finery, but you are no Bravosi dignitary, nor a Myrish magister. Her gaze was a glacial challenge. Should I know your name? Viserys refused to wilt. My name is Viserys Targaryen, last scion of the Targaryen dynasty that once ruled Westeros. He left the statement hanging, letting the old Valyrian mystique swirl in the air. I have found a new purpose here in Essos, forging alliances that can stabilize the region. Some in Pentos and Lys have expressed willingness to join a defensive pact, provided Myr receives the resources to stand firm. The Iron Bank can be part of that. Your gold could turn the tide and ensure that Tyrosh's aggression does not spread. Marilena studied him a moment longer. A Targaryen in Bravos. That alone is an interesting curiosity. She tapped her quill against the table. We will require more than words. Collateral. Guarantees from Lys, from Pentos, from any others you claim will form part of this coalition. Obtain letters of intent from these parties, stating that they will ally with Myr if the funds are granted, that they will open or maintain profitable trade routes. The more commitments you gather, the more likely we are to see this as a safe investment. Achieve that, and we can talk of interest rates. Viserys inclined his head in acceptance, heart fluttering with cautious optimism. We shall do so. Tobin, for his part, managed a tight smile and a respectful bow, though Viserys saw the tension in his eyes. They both knew that collecting such letters of intent was no small task. Yet it was a chance. They departed the Iron Bank's shadowy halls, emerging into Bravos' watery sunlight. Tobin let out a long breath. This will be complicated. Pentos might sign on easily enough, but Lys is always uncertain. Their archons have fickle loyalties. We have precious little time to gather these documents before Tyrosh makes a move. Viserys nodded. We'll do it. I have some modest standing in Pentos, enough to secure a letter. For Lys, perhaps a direct approach to certain archons who fear Tyrosh's expansion. I'll come with you if you agree. Tobin eyed him sidelong. You are quite determined to see this through. I have to be, Viserys said quietly. It is my best chance of building something real. He did not elaborate, but Tobin seemed to understand that the Targaryen saw Essos as his domain now, the place where he could carve a new future. The Myrish Magister nodded in grudging respect. They wasted no time. Tobin dispatched messengers to Myr, requesting that a formal letter of support be drafted from the Magisterial Council, while Viserys sent letters of his own to contacts in Pentos, including Miranio and even Illyrio Mopatis, explaining the stakes. There was some risk Illyrio might attempt to hijack the arrangement for his own gain, but Viserys counted on Illyrio's interest in a stable Essos to keep him somewhat in line. Meanwhile, Tobin arranged passage for them to Lys, the fabled pleasure city of azure waters and languid courtyards. There, they would petition certain archons known to mistrust Tyrosh's expansionist aims. The journey to Lys took them south along the trade lanes, weaving between islands dotted with pirate enclaves. The Myrish warship that carried them flew neutral flags in the hope of avoiding conflict. Still, they saw sails on the horizon more than once, with ships that might belong to Tyrosh or pirates, but no attack came. Lys shimmered like a jewel under the midday sun, its white buildings and graceful spires rising from turquoise waters, known throughout the world for its pleasure houses and alchemical perfumes. But beneath the sensual opulence, Lys was also a city of cunning archons who vied incessantly for power. They disembarked at a private dock. Tobin led the way up broad marble steps to meet with Archon Kalino, a matriarch of one of Lys's oldest families. She hosted them in a courtyard thick with the scent of jasmine so potent it nearly overpowered Viserys. Archon Kalino reclined on a cushioned divan, dark curls tumbling over her shoulders, eyes half-lidded but sharp with intelligence. Wine flowed freely as they explained their mission, and she listened with languid interest, occasionally feeding grapes to a small pet monkey perched near her. When they finished, she sighed theatrically. You spin a pretty story. But Lys does not rush to war on a whim. We were allied with Tyrosh once, though that was a fleeting arrangement. Perhaps we can be so again. Their envoys whispered that if we joined them, we might partition Myr's coastline for ourselves. If that is a possibility, why should we ally with you instead? Viserys sensed Tobin's agitation. He decided to speak up. Because Tyrosh will betray Lys the moment you become inconvenient. You know Tyrosh's ambitions, why share the spoils of war with Lys if they can take it all for themselves? But if Lys joins Myr and Pentos, you form a powerful triumvirate that Tyrosh will not dare antagonize. You split the cost of war among allies rather than bearing it alone. And the Iron Bank is poised to lend coin to Myr should we demonstrate the stability of this alliance. That coin can fund a joint fleet, a bulwark that will protect Lys's precious trade. Isn't that more secure than trusting Tyrosh's honeyed promises? Archon Kalino studied him, swirling her wine. You speak with conviction. Yet Lys will require assurances. If we put our name to a letter for the Iron Bank, we want something in return. Mir must promise not to encroach on certain shipping lanes that Lys has long considered its sphere of influence. We want formal recognition of those claims. Tobin exhaled. We can negotiate that. Within reason. Very good, the Archon said. And I want a personal guarantee from you, Targaryen, that you will remain in Essos to see these negotiations through. If you are truly forging alliances here, you should not flit away once you have served your own interests. Lys invests in people, not just ephemeral treaties. Viserys inclined his head. I have no intention of leaving Essos for Westeros's troubles. My place is here now. He meant it, though the words carried a faint pang. There was a time when the notion of abandoning Westeros would have felt like cutting out his own heart. But his time in exile and near-death experiences in the Red Wastes had burned away that desperation. He had found a new calling, restoring the Targaryen legacy in these free and fertile lands. Archon Kalino clapped her hands, and a scribe appeared with parchment. Over the next few hours, they hammered out the details of Lys's demands. The negotiations were by turns frustrating and enlightening. Viserys noted how Tobin had to cede certain privileges, but in exchange, Lys promised a letter of intent, contingent, of course, on seeing Myr's and Pentos's matching commitments. It was an intricate dance of paper alliances, but each signature, each seal pressed in wax, represented a step closer to forging a stable coalition. They left Lys with the promise that Archon Kalino would finalize her letter soon. Tobin was almost giddy, though in a subdued, cautious way. We are halfway there, he said aboard the warship that carried them back to Pentos. Assuming Pentos keeps its word, we'll have the backing of 2 major city-states. That might be enough to satisfy Braavos. Viserys leaned against the ship's railing, gazing at the shimmering waves. It might, he agreed, though he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. War could still break out suddenly. Tyrosh might strike Myr at any time. His thoughts drifted to how far he had come from that naive youth who believed simply shouting, "I am the dragon," would make men bow. Now, he was building alliances that could shape the fate of entire cities, and ironically, he had done so by learning humility, empathy, and cunning. Life had a strange sense of irony. Upon returning to Pentos, they learned that Meranio and Illyrio had indeed secured a letter of intent from the city's leading magisters, albeit with certain conditions. Viserys was personally thanked by the council, who saw in him a valuable intermediary. He accepted their gratitude and swiftly arranged a meeting at Illyrio's manse to keep him involved. Illyrio, resplendent as ever in voluminous silks, embraced Viserys with an avuncular grin. "My dear boy, you've truly gone and become indispensable, haven't you? Word is you're forging a grand alliance to contain Tyrosh. I knew there was a spark in you that might one day catch flame." Viserys offered a thin smile, mindful of Illyrio's manipulative nature. "I learned a great deal from the hospitality you once showed me, Illyrio. I only hope we can continue to work together for mutual benefit." But behind the merchant's wide smile, Viserys sensed watchfulness. Illyrio was not a man to let opportunities pass. He might be an ally now, but if ever he found a better angle, he would pivot. Viserys made a mental note to watch his back, but for now, their interests aligned. Pentos's letter of intent, combined with Lys's pending seal, placed Myr in a strong position for Braavos' loan. Tobin was increasingly confident that the Iron Bank would sign on, fueling the coalition's military preparations, ensuring the city-states were ready should Tyrosh attempt to seize the disputed lands by force. Thus, after a brief respite, Viserys and Tobin again sailed to Braavos, returning to the Iron Bank's austere halls. This time, letters bearing the official seals of Pentos and Lys accompanied them. Marilena Mora read them carefully, passing them among the scribes who verified the authenticity of the wax impressions. She asked pointed questions about the rumored treachery of Lys, about the reliability of Pentos's magisters, but Viserys and Tobin answered with measured confidence. Finally, the banker steepled her fingers. "It seems you have done what you promised. The Iron Bank sees potential in this arrangement. We will grant Myr the loan it seeks, though the interest rate must reflect the risk." Tobin managed a small bow. "We understand. I will finalize details with your scribes." A swirl of relief mixed with victory washed over Viserys. If Myr secured these funds, it could raise a fleet of war galleys, hire cells words to reinforce the city, deter Tyrosh from launching a quick invasion. "Thank you," he said, inclining his head. "The Iron Bank will not regret this." Marilena Morris studied him, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Perhaps not. Though we rarely regret anything for long, King Viserys. The Iron Bank always gets its due." He did not flinch at the subtle threat. Instead, he simply said, "I would expect nothing less." And thus it was done. Word of the arrangement spread quickly through Braavos' mercantile circles. Speculation rose that a formidable alliance was forming in the east. Merchant captains, sellsword captains, and envoys from other cities flocked to hear the news. In the midst of this, one day, as Viserys strolled the canal's edge, admiring the way the city's reflections shimmered in the water, a young boy ran up to him, pressing a sealed scroll into his hand. "For you, my lord," the boy said, then dashed away. Curious, Viserys broke the seal to find a short and signed message. It read, "The tiger stirs. Beware the ancient city. They will not stand idle if the triumvirate rises." The words were ominous. The tiger was often used as a symbol of Volantis, the old city whose ambitions could overshadow smaller city-states. Volantis had once harbored dreams of reuniting all the free cities under its rule. Could it be that if Tyrosh was contained, Volantis would see an opening? Uncertain, Viserys tucked the note away, mindful that Essos's politics were as vast and shifting as the seas themselves. He would have to remain vigilant. For now, though, Myr's immediate problem, Tyrosh, was being countered. Over the next weeks, Myr raised its forces. Pentos pledged partial support, promising to dispatch ships for a defensive blockade if needed. Lyssa's archons sent more ambiguous signals, but they had put their seals to an agreement that indicated readiness for joint action. War did not erupt immediately. Perhaps the show of unity was enough to deter Tyrosh from launching an immediate assault. Instead, the city seemed to shift its strategy, courting mercenaries and making overtures to Volantis. A tense stalemate settled over the disputed lands. In the midst of this calm before the storm, Viserys found himself in Myr more often than not, assisting Tobin and the magisterial council with delicate negotiations. Before long, the Myrish had come to see him not as a transient outcast but as a man valuable for bridging differences among rival city-states. Even those who mocked the notion of a Targaryen in Essos recognized his growing influence. Thus, a new idea took hold among a faction of the Myrish leadership: why not appoint Viserys Targaryen to a role of official authority in the city, making him an envoy or a governor of some newly acquired territory should the war end in Myr's favor? Some balked at elevating a Westerosi exile to such prominence, but others saw advantage. He was not Myrish, so he had no deep entanglements with Myrish noble families, making him less likely to show favoritism. He could serve as a neutral figure who might unify the other allies. And, of course, the intangible allure of a Targaryen name still carried weight in certain corners of Essos, conjuring memories of Valyria's old glory. So it was that one evening, in the candlelit hall of Myr's magisterial council, Tobin Caleres broached the subject openly before a gathering of a dozen magisters. The meeting took place around a long table inlaid with mother-of-pearl, the glow of lanterns dancing on polished wood. "We all know what the city owes to Viserys Targaryen. Tobin began, shooting Viserys a quick smile. "He has labored ceaselessly on our behalf, forging alliances with Pentos, Lys, and Bravos. He is no Myrish citizen by birth, yet he has proven a friend and a champion of Myr's cause. In recognition of his efforts, I propose we appoint him as a Lord Envoy of Myr, tasked with maintaining these alliances. We would grant him a modest estate in the city, a stipend, and official authority to speak on Myr's behalf." The discussion that followed was spirited. Some magisters objected, citing that a foreigner should not represent them officially. Others argued that Myr needed exactly such a figure to ensure Lys and Pentos believed in their sincerity. Viserys sat quietly, only speaking when asked to address concerns about his motivations. He explained that while he was born a Targaryen, his current ambitions lay in making a better life in Essos. He had no intention of dragging Myr into any Westerosi feuds. He had found a home here. After much debate, the council voted. A majority agreed with Tobin's proposal, though it was not a landslide. Still, a majority was enough to enact the measure. Thus, Viserys Targaryen found himself unexpectedly elevated to a position of official standing in Myr's hierarchy, albeit not among the highest rung. He was granted a small estate on the outskirts of the city, a villa with a modest orchard of orange trees, set along a winding canal that led to the sea. A handful of servants came with the property, as well as a rotating guard detail assigned by the city watch. Viserys walked the estate's grounds at dusk, inhaling the perfume of orange blossoms and sea air. It was a far cry from the battered tents and scorching deserts he had once endured. He allowed himself a small smile, remembering that scrawny, enraged boy who had wandered Essos with nothing but battered pride. Now, he had earned respect through diplomacy and perseverance. Of course, no reward came without new burdens. As Lord Envoy, he was expected to champion Myr's cause in upcoming treaties, to negotiate the city's interests with Lys, Pentos, Bravos, and potentially others of Volantis if it came to that. Some might resent him or try to sabotage him, and Tyrosh certainly would see him as an enemy. But that night, gazing at the silver moonlight reflecting in the canal, Viserys felt something he had not in many years. Genuine pride in himself and a budding sense of peace. He thought of Daenerys. He hoped that somewhere, she might be proud of him for learning to stand on his own 2 feet, to forge alliances without cruelty. He even dared to dream that one day she might sail to these shores and see what he had built. Then came the rumors of raiders in the disputed lands. Small skirmishes flared up, mercenary companies funded by Tyrosh clashing with Myrish scouts. Farmers fled burned hamlets, and refugees trickled into Myr's outlying provinces. Tensions rose. Viserys found himself in more war councils than he had ever anticipated, discussing the logistics of sending Myr's fledgling new fleet to patrol the contested coast. He was no military strategist, but he listened attentively to Myr's captains, applying the same logic that had served him well in negotiation. War was a form of negotiation, albeit a bloodier one. If Myr was strong, Tyrosh might back down or propose terms. If Tyrosh sensed weakness, it would attack with full force. One evening, while conferring with Myrish captains in a war room adorned with tapestries of past naval victories, Viserys was approached by a dour-faced commander named Goran Hest. Lord Envoy, Hest said, making a perfunctory salute. We appreciate your diplomatic efforts, but war is upon us. If we stand any chance of repelling Tyrosh in the field, we need more than alliances. We need leadership that can rally the soldiers, give them hope. The common folk are still uncertain about this new alliance. They need a symbol. Viserys studied him. A symbol. Hest nodded. A figure whose lineage and presence can inspire. Myrish magisters squabble too much among themselves for any to serve that role effectively. But you are Valyrian-blooded. You have the aura of an exiled king, a man of dragons. What if you took to the field, commanded troops, or at least served as a figurehead for the soldiers to rally around? They might believe in you, see you as a man destined to restore greatness to these lands. The Targaryens once rode dragons, after all. That history carries weight. Viserys felt a jolt of surprise and apprehension. Commanding troops? He had never commanded anything but a dream. And yet, the notion that his presence might unite the Myrish behind a common cause resonated. It was true that their magisters tended to bicker. I'm no battle-hardened general, he warned. I can't promise you the strategies of a Tyroshi Sells word captain who has spent his life at war. But if my presence helps give courage, if it sways the hearts of men toward unity, then I'll do it. Hest nodded, relief etched across his face. We'll provide captains to handle the tactics. You, Lord Envoy, need only show yourself, speak to the soldiers, remind them that we stand on the cusp of something greater than the petty conflicts that have forever plagued these lands. So Viserys found himself at a gathering of Myrish troops stationed near the border, in the rolling fields where farmland gave way to the contested region. 1,000 men stood in rough formation, archers, pikemen, crossbow companies, supplemented by a few hundred mercenaries from the company of the Blue Scorpion, newly hired with Bravosi coin. They wore battered leathers, metal helms, and the anxious looks of men who knew a fight was coming. Viserys was clad in a simple breastplate over fine Myrish linens, with the 3-headed dragon sigil of House Targaryen newly embroidered on the breast. Goran Hest handed him a short sword, an ornament as much as a weapon. The morning sun glinted off the steel, and a hush fell as Viserys stepped before the massed ranks. His heart pounded. Never had he spoken before so many men poised for battle. Yet he drew a breath, recalling the lessons of humility and empathy that had transformed him. Men of Myr, he began, voice steady but carrying emotion. I stand before you not as a born Myrish citizen, but as one who has chosen to embrace Myr as my home. You know my name, Viserys Targaryen. I was once lost, believing the world owed me a throne. But I learned that men earn respect by their deeds, not by the crowns they claim. Today, I choose to stand with you. War looms, and Tyrosh thinks it can march upon these fields unopposed. But they do not understand the strength that comes from unity, the strength that is born when free men and women stand together to defend their homes. You are not alone. Pentos stands with you. Lys has pledged its ships. Bravos has seen your worth. You have allies and you have a cause. Myr is a city of art and beauty, of skillful craft and proud history. It deserves defenders who will not bend to those who would conquer it. If you fight, fight knowing that you are part of something larger than yourselves. You are forging a new era, one where the free cities can work in concert rather than tear at one another's throats. And I, an exiled dragon, am honored to fight alongside you. I do not promise you easy victory. War is cruel. But if we stand firm, if we show Tyrosh that we will not kneel, they may think twice before crossing these fields. Let them see the banners of Myr side by side with Pentos, Lys, and the sigil of the dragon. Let them see we will not be broken. For Myr. A roar erupted from the assembled ranks, a tide of voices echoing across the plains. Viserys felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. The men were cheering not for a lost throne, but for a new dream, one that bound them together. In that moment, he felt a spark of the old Targaryen pride within him, but tempered with gratitude, with humility. He lifted the sword, and the morning sun caught the steel, reflecting bright rays across the throng of soldiers. For Myr, they shouted back. In the following days, scouts reported that Tyrosh's forces had indeed begun gathering at the border, joined by Sellsword companies hoping for plunder. A smaller force advanced, testing Myr's defenses. Skirmishes broke out. Viserys joined the Myrish command tent, listening as Captain Hest and others strategized the best defense. He offered suggestions where he could, though he mostly let the more experienced leaders handle tactics. Still, by his presence, he gave the men a sense that they had a champion who believed in them. When the Tyroshi vanguard finally clashed with Myr's forward lines, it was a bitter fight, though not a full-scale battle. Arrows whistled, swords rang. The Myrish lines held surprisingly firm. The newly formed crossbow brigades, funded by Bravosi Gold, harried the Tyroshi flanks. Mercenary cavalry from the company of the Blue Scorpion counterattacked swiftly. Viserys, guarded by a small retinue, rode along the back lines, rallying any wavering units, giving support where needed. He glimpsed death in the mud and screams on the wind, the brutality of real war a stark reminder that no alliance could make bloodshed pretty. By twilight, the Tyroshi vanguard had withdrawn, having gained little ground. Myr's forces had lost men, but their lines held. Tending to the wounded in the aftermath, Viserys felt a strange mixture of horror and resolve. He knelt by a young soldier with a grievous cut across his side, pressing a cloth to stem the bleeding. "Hold on," he urged. "We'll get you to a maester or a healer." The soldier coughed, eyes glassy, then recognized Viserys' face. "Am I Lord Targaryen?" he whispered. "We turned them back, didn't we?" "We did," Viserys said, though tears threatened. He clutched the soldier's hand, trying to convey hope. "You fought bravely." A faint smile touched the soldier's blood-flecked lips. Then he groaned in pain. Viserys shouted for a medic, feeling helpless, swallowing back rage at the cruelty of war. Yet he also felt a renewed determination that if there must be war, he would see it ended swiftly and on terms that ensured stability, no matter the cost. Tyrosh did not launch a larger assault immediately, perhaps discouraged by Myr's resistance. Instead, both sides settled into an uneasy standoff. Diplomats from Tyrosh arrived in Myr under a white banner, requesting parley. Tobin, Viserys, and a few other magisters met them in a neutral field. The Tyroshi envoys wore flamboyant cloaks, their mustaches dyed in bright colors to signal their city's flamboyant traditions. But their words were serious. They offered a deal. Myr would cede certain contested districts in the disputed lands, paying a tribute to Tyrosh, and in return Tyrosh would halt its advance. Tobin bristled. "We have no reason to pay tribute. We have allies now. And if you escalate to full war, you'll face Pentos' fleets, Lys's involvement, Braavos' disapproval. Think carefully." The Tyroshi envoy sneered. "Lys is fickle and Pentos is far away. Myrish illusions of grandeur will cost you dearly. You might win a battle or two, but eventually Tyrosh will break your lines. Better to yield now. We have an arrangement with Volantis as well." Viserys' blood chilled at the mention of Volantis. If that ancient power truly stood with Tyrosh, the war might escalate beyond anything Myr could handle. But he held his composure. If Volantis chooses to back Tyrosh, they risk angering Braavos, a power they can ill afford to provoke. The triumvirate of Myr, Pentos, and Lys was enough to secure the Iron Bank's favor. That alone should tell you something. The envoy glared, uncertain. Do not be so sure. Bravos will intervene for you if real war threatens. We will give you 3 days to consider our offer. After that, Tyrosh will not be so generous." They left, leaving tension in their wake. That night, Tobin, Viserys, and the other Myrish leaders argued in a war council. Some believed they should accept the Tyroshi proposal to avoid a larger conflict, keep the city safe, and wait for a better moment. Others, including Tobin, insisted that paying tribute would only embolden Tyrosh to demand more. Viserys spoke in favor of rejecting the tribute, urging that the alliance with Lys and Pentos could hold strong if they showed unity. "To yield now is to undermine all we have built," he said. Eventually, the council voted to reject Tyrosh's terms. Messengers were dispatched with a curt refusal. The next days brought fresh rumors of Tyroshi reinforcements, a sign that the conflict might soon erupt in full. Viserys spent that time fortifying Myr's border, rallying troops, trying to ensure that Pentos's promised fleet indeed arrived in the Sea of Myrth to block Tyrosh's supply lines. He sent urgent letters to Lys, reminding the Archons of their pledge. He worried that a single betrayal could bring Myr to its knees. Yet, if the alliance held, Tyrosh might be forced to sue for peace. This was the crucible that would test everything Viserys had built. Late one afternoon, as Viserys was preparing to ride to the front lines, a messenger galloped up, out of breath, bearing a sealed letter. Viserys recognized the crest as that of Lys, Archon Kalino's personal seal. Breaking the wax, he read, "To Viserys Targaryen, Lord Envoy of Myr. We have received word that Tyrosh has approached Volantis for support. The Archons of Lys are uneasy. Yet I assure you, we stand by our agreement provided Myr can hold its own in the field. If you rout the Tyroshi vanguard again, Lys will commit ships to blockade Tyrosh's harbor. Show us your mettle and we shall act. Should Myr falter, we cannot risk a lost cause." It was the typical tightrope walk of Lys. They would not risk their own fleet until certain Myr had proven it could hold off Tyrosh. Viserys clenched his jaw but saw no alternative except to fight for that proof. All the alliances he had painstakingly built hinged on a single, bloody test of arms. He spurred his horse forward, riding to meet Captain Hest and the assembled Myrish forces near a fortress that guarded the main pass through which Tyrosh's army would likely march. The fortress, once a relic from a past war, stood half in ruins, but its position on the hill gave vantage over the plains below. Myrish scouts reported Tyrosh's troops advancing, a larger force this time. The Myrish lines braced for a pitched battle. That night, beneath a dark sky pricked by stars, Viserys walked among the men, offering words of encouragement. He felt their anxiety, saw it in their eyes, but also sensed a growing resolve. The Targaryen had come to stand with them. Pentos's reinforcements, some ships along the coast, had prevented Tyrosh from simply landing a force behind them. Tomorrow at dawn, the armies would clash. Myr's fate, and perhaps Viserys' own future, hung in the balance. The first light of day broke across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pale rose. A trumpet blast signaled Tyrosh's approach. Viserys sat astride his horse, flanked by Captain Hest and a detachment of cavalry from the Blue Scorpion mercenaries. On the slopes below the ruined fortress, Myr's infantry waited in formation, crossbows bristling, pikes angled. He could see the swirling colors of Tyrosh's banners as their columns advanced, bright teal, orange, stripes that stood out against the dust. Armored cavalry trotted ahead of their main line, swords glinting. Despite the tension, Viserys was struck by how majestic and terrible it looked, the pageantry of war. Then the horns sounded and the Tyroshi assault began. Archers loosed arrows in a black rain. Myr's crossbowmen answered, bolts whizzing through the air. Men cried out, horses screamed, the clang of steel on steel resounded as the lines met. Viserys kept near the cavalry flank, waiting for Hest's signal. The plan was to lure the Tyroshi into attacking the center, then countercharge with cavalry at a crucial moment. Myr's center held bravely, though Viserys saw men fall. The taste of dust and fear clung to the back of his throat. Then Hest raised his sword, signaling the cavalry forward. Viserys felt the lurch of his horse's muscles beneath him as they thundered down the slope, the Blue Scorpions letting out a fierce war cry. They slammed into the Tyroshi flank, surprising them. Viserys had little time to think, focusing on staying astride, sword half-raised. The swirl of battle engulfed him, shouts, the flash of steel. More than once, someone lunged at him, only to be parried by his guards. He managed to swing his blade once, clumsily warding off a Tyroshi soldier who had stumbled too close. All around him was chaos, the rumble of hooves, the shrieks of dying men. The shock of the cavalry charge broke the Tyroshi flank, forcing them to reel back. The Myrish infantry, emboldened, pushed forward. The fighting ebbed and surged, but as the hours ground on, Myr held the advantage. Tyrosh had expected an easy breakthrough, not a coordinated defense with cavalry that could strike precisely. By late morning, their lines were fraying. A second wave from Myr's ranks hammered in, forcing Tyrosh's center to give ground. The mercenaries on Myr's side proved their worth, driving Tyrosh's own cells word companies back. At last, seeing no victory in sight, the Tyroshi commander sounded a retreat. Men fell away in ragged lines, leaving behind the dead, the wounded, and shattered gear. The ground was littered with bodies, the soil muddy with blood. Viserys reined in his horse, breath-heaving, heart-pounding. They had won the field. At the cost of hundreds of lives, but they had won. Cheers rippled across Myr's ranks as the battered survivors realized the day was theirs. Viserys dismounted shakily, leaning on his sword, scanning the carnage. He felt no triumph at the sight, only weary relief. Soldiers clapped him on the shoulder, shouting, "Long live the dragon," or "3 cheers for Myr." His mind spun with the horror of war mixed with the knowledge that this victory might secure the alliance, might force Tyrosh to the negotiating table before a larger invasion came. As dusk fell, messages flew from the battlefield to Lys and Pentos. Myr had repulsed Tyrosh, won a stand-up fight. True to her word, Archon Kalino declared that Lys's fleet would sail to blockade Tyrosh, choking off their trade. Pentos, likewise, readied more ships to assist. Tyrosh, now facing a multi-front containment, began sending out feelers for a truce. A hush fell over the disputed lands, a sense that a new power dynamic was emerging. It took weeks of negotiations in a grand conclave held in neutral territory between Myr and Tyrosh for a peace to be hammered out. Viserys was there as Lord Envoy, standing beside Tobin and other Myrish leaders, negotiating from a position of strength. Tyrosh begrudgingly agreed to recognize Myr's claim to certain contested districts, to pay a modest indemnity for the damages inflicted. In return, Myr halted any further advances and promised not to press Tyrosh's own territory. Lys and Pentos lifted their threat of a blockade once Tyrosh signed the treaty. Braavos, sending an observer, was pleased to see stability restored. Throughout these negotiations, Viserys was hailed by some as a vital piece of Myr's success, the exiled dragon who helped unite the free cities in a common cause. Others dismissed him as a figurehead, crediting the real cunning to the Myrish magisters. Viserys did not mind. He had proven to himself he could be more than a beggar king, more than a man defined by rage and obsession. Now, House Targaryen had a seedling in Myr, a foothold in Essos' shifting sands. In the months that followed, Myr prospered from the new peace. Trade flowed, alliances with Pentos and Lys solidified, and Tyrosh nursed its wounds. Some whispered that Volantis had considered intervening but backed away when it saw the alliance building. Viserys oversaw further negotiations, traveling between the cities to ensure each side honored their commitments. He earned a reputation for fairness, for pragmatic deal-making. The illusions he once clung to, that he should be worshipped as a king, had faded into a more grounded leadership style. He found that men followed not because he was a Targaryen but because he strove to listen to their needs. Over time, Myr's leadership recognized that to maintain this new era of cooperation, they needed a central figure who could arbitrate disputes among the allied cities. Tobin, now the unofficial head of the Magisterial Council, suggested that Viserys take on an even greater mantle, effectively acting as a steward of the triumvirate. Pentos, Lys, and Myr could each keep their autonomy, but they would look to him for mediation, ensuring that petty rivalries did not flare into conflict again. The notion of a noble leader in Essos surfaced in rumor and conversation. Some called it a princely role, others a mere steward. Viserys was cautious, not wanting to appear to seize power. But after many quiet discussions and the urging of magisters from all 3 cities, he accepted a formal oath to serve as the triumvirate's principal mediator. It was not a throne, but in some ways it was more meaningful. So, on a sunny morning in Myr's Grand Plaza, with hundreds of onlookers crowding the edges, officials from Pentos, Lys, and Myr gathered. A raised platform had been constructed, draped in banners showing each city's sigil as well as the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Viserys stood at the center, wearing robes of pale silver trimmed in Myrish gold. His hair, that telltale silver gold, stirred in the coastal breeze. Representatives of each city spoke, praising his role in forging the alliance, guiding them through war, and helping secure peace. Then Tobin stepped forward with a slender circlet of braided gold, simple yet elegant. Kneeling, Viserys bowed his head. He expected some flicker of memory, some longing for the crown that was once promised him in Westeros, but instead he felt only a quiet sense of fulfillment. Tobin placed the circlet upon Viserys' brow. Viserys Targaryen, by the authority vested in me by the magisterial council of Myr, with the blessing of Lys and Pentos, I name you the noble leader of this triumvirate, the mediator and guardian of our alliance. May you continue to guide us with wisdom and temper our ambitions with reason for the betterment of all. Cheers rang out. A scattering of applause and triumphant horns sounded. Viserys rose, the circlet glinting in the sun. He gazed across the crowd, seeing the faces of Myrish citizens, Pentoshi envoys, Lyseni archons, sellswords, and merchants, all gathered to witness the birth of something new. Lifting his chin, Viserys spoke, I accept this responsibility with gratitude and humility. May this alliance prove that the free cities can stand together, forging prosperity rather than conflict. I vow to serve you all to the best of my ability as a Targaryen reborn in Essos dedicated to unity and the welfare of these lands. A roar of approval swept through the plaza. The sound of it echoed off the marble columns, soared over the mosaic tiles. Viserys' heart pounded, a swirl of pride, relief, and hope. He thought again of Daenerys, of how she had once believed he had no gentleness in him. He wished she could see him now, forging alliances rather than demanding tributes. Perhaps someday fate would see them reunited. For now, he would focus on serving the triumvirate he had helped build. As the day's festivities wore on banquets, toasts, and elaborate Myrish dances, Viserys slipped away for a moment of reflection. In a secluded corner of a garden overlooking the canal, he stood alone, the circlet still resting on his brow. A new sense of purpose glowed within him. He recalled the hot desert night when he had nearly died of thirst after being banished from Drogo's Khalasar, how he had cursed the gods for his misfortune. Now he stood robed in authority, entrusted with the fate of 3 major cities, forging a legacy that would last beyond him. This was a redemption he never thought possible. Steeling himself, he turned to rejoin the revelry. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges. He knew that Volantis lurked, that other city-states might chafe under the triumvirate's growing power. There would always be new threats, new ambitions swirling in Essos' tapestry of intrigues. But for the first time, Viserys Targaryen felt prepared to face them not as a desperate boy but as a man who had earned his place. If the free folk of Essos saw him worthy to lead, then he would lead them into a new era, an era of measured ambition and shared prosperity. Rumors spread quickly. The noble leader Targaryen was said to hold the cities in the palm of his hand through sheer diplomacy and the aura of his dragon heritage. Merchants from Volantis to Karth whispered of his rise. Some scoffed that an exiled Westerosi princeling could hold real power. Others believed that a Targaryen in Essos might rekindle some glimmer of Valyrian might. Meanwhile, the average citizen of Myr or Pentos or Lys saw rising trade, fewer raids, and a sense that war was not so imminent. For them, that was enough to justify this unorthodox leadership. In the following months, Viserys worked tirelessly to strengthen the triumvirate's bonds. He encouraged cultural exchanges, forging festivals where Myr's artisans, Lys's renowned courtesans and scholars, and Pentos's traders mingled. He invited ambassadors from Braavos to see how the alliance fostered stability, hoping to gain Braavos' formal blessing and perhaps more loans to fund infrastructure. Slowly, trust grew among the allied cities. He addressed corruption where he could, mediating disputes among magisters with a level head. Even Illyrio Mopatus, once the spider spinning his own webs in Pentos, found it more profitable to cooperate with Viserys' administration than to undermine it. Of course, not everyone welcomed this new order. Spies whispered of plots in Tyrosh, of war hawks in Volantis who eyed the triumvirate with suspicion. Rival merchant factions in Lys resented the growing unity, worried it might limit their personal profiteering. Yet Viserys had grown adept at negotiation, quelling dissent with compromise and cunning. Where once he would have lashed out in fury, he now recognized the need to be patient, to see the bigger picture, to keep forging alliances rather than letting them crack under pressure. One day, as he strolled through the orchard of his estate outside Myr, where orange blossoms bloomed under a warm sun, a messenger arrived bearing a letter sealed with a sigil he had not seen in years, a 3-headed dragon, but stylized differently than his own. His heart stuttered. Could it be from Daenerys? With trembling fingers, he broke the seal. The letter was short, its script uneven but unmistakably Valyrian in style. Brother, word of your deeds in Myr has reached me across the grasslands and seas. Khal Drogo is gone. I have faced trials beyond measure, and now I walk a path entwined with dragons once thought lost. I write in haste, uncertain if this missive will find you. If it does, know that I hold no grudge for the past, though it pained me once. The world shifts, and I see that you too have shifted. Perhaps in time we may meet again. For now, I travel east, chasing whispers of an ancient power. May we both shape our destinies for the better. Daenerys. A swirl of emotion rose in Viserys' throat. So she lived and had heard of him. She had forgiven him enough to send this letter. He closed his eyes, letting relief wash over him. She had changed too, apparently forging her own path. Even though a part of him yearned to see her, he sensed that her journey took her far beyond the Triumvirate's domain. The letter's mention of ancient power made him wonder if the rumors of dragons had truth to them. Regardless, he felt gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. Perhaps one day he would stand face to face with his sister and show her that he had become a man she could be proud to call brother. But for now he had a realm of sorts to watch over. Not a kingdom in the Westerosi sense, but a network of free cities that needed careful shepherding. He tucked Daenerys's letter away, stepping beneath the shade of the orange trees. The blossom scent was sweet and hopeful. He thought of the tragedies that had shaped him, the humiliations, the near-death experiences, the bitterness he had once harbored. And he thought of what he had built out of the ashes here in Essos. At length, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching, the soft pad of slippers on the garden path. Tobin Caleres appeared, bowing respectfully. "My Lord Envoy, pardon, my noble leader. The Pentoshi delegation has arrived. They await you in the receiving hall." Viserys nodded, tucking the letter into his cloak. "The Triumvirate's duties called." "Thank you, Tobin. I'll be there shortly." He inhaled the sweet air one last time, letting a smile grace his lips. Then he turned and strode back along the path, the gold circlet glinting in the midday light. The orchard receded behind him, and with it the last vestiges of the beggar king he had once been. Viserys Targaryen walked forward as a noble leader in Essos, a man who had claimed no iron throne but had found, instead, his soul's redemption in forging a realm bound not by conquest, but by cooperation and respect. And though storms would surely come, he felt ready at last to meet them, a dragon tempered by all the fires he had survived and reborn to shine in a world he had embraced as his own. Viserys barely glanced at the reflection of his own image as he passed the polished bronze mirrors in the corridor of his Myrish estate. Once he had been obsessively aware of how he looked, of the regal cut of his cheekbones, the proud tilt of his chin, the silver-gold hair so reminiscent of the ancient Valyrian blood in his veins. Now, the circlet of braided gold resting upon his brow served as a visible reminder that his days of desperate chasing were over. He possessed something tangible: leadership, respect hard-won, and a calling beyond the illusions of an iron throne he would likely never see. Yet sometimes, passing his own reflection, he almost expected to see the haunted, feverish boy who once screeched about his birthright. That ghost was gone. He had carved out a place in Essos that felt, if not wholly secure, then at least grounded in a sense of purpose. He emerged into the receiving hall, a spacious chamber whose walls were adorned with intricate Myrish tapestries, each woven with swirling motifs of mythical beasts and heroic legends. Sunlight poured in through windows that overlooked a canal, painting everything in the golden hues of afternoon. There, the Pentoshi delegation awaited him, 3 men and 2 women, each wearing fine robes in the deep violet favored by the ruling magisters of Pentos. The group was led by Meranio, the Myrish merchant lord who had first taken a gamble on Viserys many moons before. Meranio had grown heavier around the middle, but his sharp gaze was unchanged, and he bowed with a flourish to acknowledge Viserys' new station. "Lord Envoy," he said, using the formal title that Myr's magisterial council had bestowed. "It's good to see you again. We bring news from Pentos." Viserys gestured for them to sit at a long table set with cups and pitchers of pomegranate juice and mint-infused water. His steward, a tall, calm-faced man named Darrow, hovered discreetly in the background. Viserys took his seat at the head of the table. "Tell me," he said, in a voice more measured and confident than he himself sometimes felt. Meranio glanced at his companions. One of the women, wearing her hair coiled high and pinned with a delicate chain of silver, cleared her throat. "My lord, we come to discuss a development that concerns the Triumvirate's interest in the disputed lands. Pentos has discovered that Tyrosh, though momentarily humbled, has been courting new alliances beyond Volantis. Our spies whisper of envoys traveling to the Shadowlands. Perhaps it is rumor, but we suspect Tyrosh is seeking exotic cells words or mercenaries from the Far East, places like Mantries or even distant Sarnath. If this is true, it could shift the balance again." Viserys' chest tightened at the thought. The triumvirate of Myr, Pentos, and Lys had only just enforced a fragile peace upon Tyrosh. The treaty remained in effect, but such treaties were always precarious. If Tyrosh brought in fresh forces from some remote corner of Essos, those who would not blanch at local politics or alliances, war might spark anew. "We must take this seriously," he said. "Though rumors often swirl thick as flies. How certain are we of Tyrosh's intentions?" Morano spread his hands in a gesture of polite uncertainty. Our sources are credible, but the specifics remain foggy. Still, even if Tyrosh is only testing the waters, it's a warning. They tasted defeat at Mir's border, and they won't readily forget the humiliation. Already, the triumvirate prevents them from expanding. They may try to break that hold. Viserys tapped a finger against the table's polished surface. Then we will address it directly. I'll send word to Tobin Caleres and the Myrish Council that we should dispatch envoys to Tyrosh to remind them of the terms of our accord and to politely inquire about these rumored alliances. He paused, considering. I also propose a show of triumvirate strength. Let Lys and Pentos each rotate a small squadron of ships along Tyrosh's shipping lanes, a lawful patrol to deter pirates, of course, but let Tyrosh see we remain vigilant. The Pentoshi delegates exchanged satisfied glances. Morano's lips curved in approval. That would send a message. And if I may add, Braavos might also be willing to reiterate its position that it frowns upon any city that endangers maritime trade in these waters. A subtle condemnation from the Iron Bank could do wonders. Viserys nodded, though he knew well that Braavos operated on its own schedule and interest. Yet Braavos had an uneasy relationship with Volantis, and Braavosi bankers would hardly welcome Tyrosh stoking chaos. I'll write to my contacts there. Let's move swiftly but carefully. The last thing we need is to push Tyrosh into open rebellion again, not unless we know we can contain it with minimal bloodshed. He could sense relief in the Pentoshi delegates. For all their talk of cunning, they still feared major conflict that might disrupt commerce, and commerce was what the free cities thrived upon. As the meeting concluded, Viserys walked the group to the courtyard, where slender Myrish columns gleamed in the late afternoon sun. Morano lingered behind the others, letting them drift toward the gate. You seem at ease in this role, Morano said quietly. You've come far since that day in Pentos when you settled my shipping dispute. Viserys let a small smile form. I've had good teachers, yourself among them, he answered. Essos is a land of shifting alliances. I merely learned to move with the currents rather than fight them. Morano inclined his head. And you've become essential to Mir's prosperity. Be careful, though, envy can be a dangerous thing. Some among the magisterial council whisper that a foreign-born leader might overshadow them. I've heard rumors that a few harbor resentment. They'll never forget you were once the so-called beggar king. And even if many respect you, a portion loathes the idea of bowing to a Targaryen, no matter how beneficial you've been. Viserys studied the man's face, noting the sincerity in his eyes. Thank you for the warning. I will remain watchful. Indeed, he'd learned that alliances could shift in an instant, but he would not cower from possibilities. He would continue to do his duty. Safe travels back to Pentos, he said, clasping Morano's arm in a friendly gesture. When the delegation departed, Viserys strolled around the garden, mind abuzz with speculation. He thought of the letter from Daenerys, the only letter he had received from her thus far. It had remained silent since then, and he sometimes wondered if she had found her way deeper into the east, or if she now commanded something more dangerous than an army. Like real dragons, if such miracles still existed in the world. The memory of that possibility gave him hope. If real dragons flew again somewhere in Essos, who was to say the triumvirate might not benefit from such power? But the notion also filled him with cautious worry. Dragons, after all, bowed to no one except their rider. And if Daenerys harbored any bitterness for the past, or had changed beyond recognition, her reappearance might shift everything he had built. He sighed, letting the garden's fragrance soothe him for a moment, then called for a scribe to help draft messages. The triumvirate needed to respond swiftly to Tyrosh's rumored moves. He would not let them gather new alliances in secret, not without ensuring Mir, Pentos, and Lys were prepared. Over the next weeks, matters remained relatively calm. Tobin Caleres, now the de facto head of the Magisterial Council, supported Viserys' plan to rotate ships near Tyrosh's lanes. Lys agreed, though Archon Kalino added her usual conditions and a demand for partial compensation of costs. Pentos contributed a few war galleys. Tyrosh's attempts to hide new alliances became more difficult under the watchful eyes of the Triumvirate's patrols. Despite a few tense standoffs, actual conflict did not erupt. Yet in the quiet corridors of Mir, something else stirred. Viserys began to hear murmurs of discontent among certain magisters and wealthy guildmasters. They spoke in corners, complaining that too much coin went to sustaining the triumvirate's readiness, that taxes had risen to maintain a standing force. They whispered about the once impoverished Targaryen who now wielded more influence than entire families with centuries of Myrish history. Twice, Viserys received unnerving reports that some unknown group had attempted to bribe lesser officials in the city watch to sabotage the triumvirate's warships. Both times, watchful captains uncovered the plot early, but it was a warning sign. The facade of unity within Myr was not unbreakable. One evening, Viserys found himself in a private meeting with Tobin. They sat in the latter's study, a modest but comfortable room lined with shelves of scrolls. Tobin seemed uneasy, tapping a finger on his desk. "I have reason to believe that someone on the council is funding those who want to destabilize your position," he admitted. "I do not suspect a major conspiracy yet, but the longer you hold power, the more some see you as a rival instead of an asset." Viserys exhaled slowly, a mixture of weariness and determination stirring inside. "Do you have names? Or at least suspicions? There's a minor faction led by Magister Sapton Uller who's made no secret of resenting you. He disliked the triumvirate from the start. Claims Myr is better off acting alone or forging new deals with Volantis. I've no proof he's behind these sabotage attempts, but he's been quietly meeting with a group of disgruntled guildmasters." Viserys considered. He had encountered Uller once or twice, a rail-thin man with a hooked nose and a condescending stare. They had exchanged polite pleasantries, but Viserys had sensed hostility behind. The Magister's forced smiles. "If he does plan something, I want to handle it without bloodshed," Viserys said at length. "We cannot appear divided to Tyrosh or Volantis. Perhaps I should speak with him directly, gauge his intentions." Tobin looked skeptical. That might provoke him. Still, a direct approach could flush him out. "Only be cautious, no cornered magister ever goes down quietly in Myr." Viserys' mouth curved in a wry half-smile. "I've faced worse foes than a cornered bureaucrat. Let me arrange something discreet." And so, with Tobin's quiet support, Viserys reached out to Magister Uller. He invited him to the Orchard estate at dusk for a private discussion of city matters, framing it as a courtesy from the noble leader to an esteemed council member. Uller accepted, though his short, formal reply carried no warmth. On the appointed night, the sky blushed with the last light of sunset as Uller's carriage clattered up the gravel path. Viserys received him in a small antechamber off the main hall with only a single servant present to pour wine. Uller stepped inside wearing robes of rich burgundy that seemed at odds with his sour expression. His nose twitched as if he scented a trap. "Lord Envoy," he said, tilting his head in something not quite a bow. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this private audience?" Viserys gestured for him to sit, keeping his tone civil. "Myr thrives under our alliance, Magister. But I realize the burdens are not small: taxes, allocations of resources, the constant vigilance. I would hear your concerns directly so we might address them before resentment grows." Uller regarded him with the thin-lipped smile of a man forced to endure a charade. "Indeed. My concerns are simple. Myr's sovereignty is diluted by the triumvirate. We funnel coin into supporting Pentosian warships and Lyseni expansions of trade, all in the name of shared defense. Meanwhile, Myrish trade networks must abide by new tariffs that limit certain routes so that Lys can profit. Our city is strong. We do not need to bend to outsiders." Viserys sipped his wine before replying. "I understand the frustration. But Tyrosh threatened war on Myr. We needed allies. That alliance has helped us repel Tyrosh, secure loans from Bravos, and expand certain markets that otherwise would be dangerous to operate in. The triumvirate is not about bending to outsiders. It's about forging a stable region where Myr can flourish without constant fear." Uller's jaw tensed. "And how long must we bow to Lys's demands? Archon Kalino and her cronies are untrustworthy. Pentos is scarcely better, its leaders shift with the winds. We yoke ourselves to those who may, at any moment, betray us. Then there is you, a Targaryen by blood but no Myrish ties by birth. You say you represent Myr's interests, but you have no lineage here, no generational stake. This orchard, your titles, these are gifts. How do we know your loyalty is not equally fleeting?" Viserys kept his voice calm, though a flicker of anger stirred deep within him. He remembered the days when he would have raged at such accusations. But that was not who he was now. "I understand your doubts," he said quietly. "I came to Myr with nothing. But Myr gave me a home, and I've given Myr my dedication. If I'd wanted to cast the city aside, I could have done so long ago. Instead, I've negotiated on its behalf, stood with our soldiers on the battlefield, shed blood with them. I'm not going anywhere, Magister. My fortunes are bound to Myr. Uller arched an eyebrow, unimpressed, though he tapped a finger on the arm of his chair. Words. Many men spill them freely. Viserys leaned forward, letting sincerity fill his voice. Then let me propose action. If you think the triumvirate arrangement is unfair to Mir, come to me with a specific grievance, some trade route or resource allotment that you believe disadvantages us. I will personally take it to the triumvirate council and push for a better compromise. Let me prove to you that I serve Mir's interests. A flicker crossed Uller's face as though he was intrigued despite himself. You would do that? If your proposals are reasonable, yes, Viserys said. I have no desire to make Mir subservient to Lys or Pentos. We are partners, not servants. Uller narrowed his eyes, weighing the offer. At length he rose, his robes rustling. I will consider your words. Perhaps we will speak again soon. For now, I take my leave. Viserys stood, a half-smile curling his lips. My door is always open, Magister. Good night. He watched as Uller swept out, posture stiff, face a mask of controlled emotion. Viserys let out a breath, uncertain if he had defused a threat or merely delayed it. Still, extending the olive branch was more constructive than letting suspicion fester. He would indeed examine the triumvirate's trade agreements. If there were areas where Mir was unfairly burdened, better to correct them now. The triumvirate would only survive if each member felt it gained from the alliance. Days trickled by. Tyrash's rumored overtures to shadowy eastern lands remained rumors, no more. The triumvirate's patrols kept watch while Volantis stayed ominously quiet. Within Mir, the usual bustle continued. Artisans honed their craft, guilds thrived, travelers poured in to see the city that boasted a wealth of new trade. Viserys presided over a small court of envoys, hearing disputes between merchants from different cities, a role that tested his patience but which he found surprisingly rewarding. Settling a shipping quarrel or a contract dispute through logic and compromise felt like forging a miniature peace each time. Then one afternoon, word arrived from Braavos, a high-ranking representative from the Iron Bank, Marilena Mora, whom Viserys had negotiated with before, planned a visit to Mir in person. She traveled with a retinue of Braavosi bankers and lawyers, purportedly to assess the city's stability and discuss further loans or trade expansions. Although no official reason was given beyond general interest, Viserys suspected it was also a fact-finding mission. The Iron Bank wanted to see if the triumvirate was still solid or ripe for dissolution and whether Mir was worth additional investment. Tobin was delighted by the prospect of fresh Braavosi coin. If we secure more funding, we could improve the city's harbor fortifications, expand the northern canal trade route. With Tyrosh restless, a stronger infrastructure is essential. Viserys agreed, though he cautioned that Braavos rarely gave money without demanding strict terms. We must be prepared for the interest rates and conditions. Still, this is an opportunity, especially if we can show them Mir is stable. Preparations for Marilena's arrival began at once. Mir readied a grand welcome, intending to impress the Braavosi visitors with the city's famed mosaic courtyards, elaborate feasts, and the intellectual might of its artisans. Viserys personally oversaw many of the arrangements, mindful that a successful impression could win Mir not just gold but also Braavos' political goodwill. Meanwhile, letters flew to Lys and Pentos, inviting them to send small delegations to underscore the triumvirate's unity. The day arrived hot and bright. Mir's harbor bustled with activity as Marilena's galley docked. She stepped ashore, flanked by bankers in tidy dark robes, each embroidered with a discreet Iron Bank sigil. She wore a practical traveling cloak, her raven-black hair pinned back neatly, her face composed. Viserys, Tobin, and a retinue of Myrish dignitaries greeted her with polite bows and words of welcome. Marilena surveyed the city with cool interest. It's been some time since I last visited Mir, she remarked, voice smooth as polished stone. I hear it has flourished under this triumvirate arrangement. Tobin inclined his head. Indeed, Lady Mora. We hope you'll find the city much grown. Viserys stepped forward, offering the slightest inclination of his head. Marilena Mora, it's a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Mir. May your stay be both informative and profitable. She studied him with the same calculating gaze he remembered from their negotiations in Braavos. Lord Envoy Targaryen, she said, her tone not quite warm yet free of open hostility. I look forward to seeing firsthand how Mir is shaping its future. They proceeded to a grand carriage that would convey them through the city's main avenues. Along the route, Myrish commoners and guild artisans lined the streets, curious and eager to impress the Braavosi. Street performers spun bright ribbons, jugglers tossed knives. Viserys noted that while the crowd's cheers were genuine, especially for the triumvirate that had spared them from a brutal war, he could see a handful of watchers wearing skeptical or resentful expressions. Not everyone was content with the shifting power structure. Still, the overall mood was festive. Marilena observed the city through the carriage window, occasionally making mild remarks about the architecture or the layout of the canals. She asked pointed questions about Myr's tax policies, the triumvirate's stance on cross-city trade, whether the defensive blockade near Tyrosh had proven costly. Viserys answered candidly, mindful that any deception would be easily uncovered by the Iron Bank's extensive network. Finally, they arrived at the magisterial council hall, where a formal banquet awaited. That evening, Myr's main plaza glowed with lanterns and torches. Musicians played softly as dignitaries mingled. From Lys came 2 archons, not Kalino herself but her deputies, and from Pentos arrived a minor prince. They greeted the Bravosi politely, haggling politely about shipping lanes between sips of spiced wine. Viserys drifted through the gathering, ensuring all parties felt attended to. He paused beside Marilena, who stood at the edge of the courtyard, quietly watching a troupe of dancers pirouette across marble tiles. "You've gone to considerable lengths to welcome me," she observed, turning her head slightly to regard him. "I'm sure it's not merely for the sake of hospitality." Viserys smiled without guile. "We wish to show you that Myr has grown prosperous and stable, that the alliance with Lys and Pentos is holding firm. If the Iron Bank is inclined, we would welcome further investment in infrastructure, perhaps even expansions that connect Myr more directly with Braavos' shipping routes. Such measures benefit us both." She sipped her wine, eyes revealing nothing. "Perhaps. Though we must see if this prosperity is built on sand or stone. You've repelled Tyrosh once, but they remain a threat, do they not?" "We have no illusions," Viserys said. "But that's precisely why stability is paramount. And Braavos, as the greatest of the free cities, surely appreciates a stable Essos." Marilena shifted her gaze to watch the dancers again. "You speak well, Lord Envoy. Still, I remember a time when you were a desperate supplicant, seeking coin to fund Myr's war effort. You've come a long way." He inclined his head, acknowledging the memory without shame. "I have. And Myr has as well." She set her glass aside, her voice dropping to a quieter register. "The Iron Bank invests in successes. Show me that Myr's leadership is unified, that your triumvirate does not teeter on the brink of dissolution, and I will be inclined to recommend a generous line of credit. But if I sense cracks, factions squabbling, a precarious hold on power, then no. We do not chase doomed causes." Viserys understood the subtext all too well. Any hint of internal strife might sink their chances. But he calmly met her gaze. "You'll find no shortage of strong wills in the triumvirate, but that's how alliances function here. We resolve disputes through negotiation and mutual benefit. Your scrutiny is welcome. By the time you leave, I hope you'll see that Myr is worthy of the bank's confidence." Marilena gave him a faint, almost cryptic smile. "We shall see." The next days were a whirlwind of tours, inspections, and careful presentations. Tobin and other magisters took the Bravosi through Myr's bustling marketplace, demonstrating the expansion in commerce since the triumvirate formed. They visited workshops producing renowned Myrish lace, glassware, and delicate clockwork pieces that sold for high prices across Essos. Soldiers and city watch captains showcased their well-maintained armories, explaining how triumvirate funds had helped standardize equipment and fortify defensive positions along the border. Viserys personally escorted Marilena and her associates to the site of a newly constructed canal lock, financed in part by the initial Bravosi loans. The architects beamed with pride, showing off the engineering feats that would speed trade shipments from the interior. Through it all, Marilena remained guarded but seemingly impressed. She questioned the costs and returns, the timeline for repayment of existing debts, the potential for future expansions. Tobin gave her reams of documents to peruse, each meticulously stamped. Viserys assisted, highlighting how the triumvirate's synergy reduced risk. If Myr faced a threat, Pentos and Lys would intervene, making a catastrophic default on any loan far less likely. The Iron Bank valued stability above all, and that was what Viserys promised. Yet behind the scenes, trouble brewed. On the third day of Marilena's visit, word came that a small but violent riot had broken out in one of Myr's poorer districts near the southwestern walls. The city watch contained it quickly, but rumor claimed that agitators had roused the crowd by railing against high taxes and foreign entanglements. Several watchmen were injured and a dozen rioters were arrested. The timing could not be worse. Tobin found Viserys at the Orchard estate. "We have to keep this from souring the Bravosi impression," he said urgently. "Marilena and her colleagues mustn't think Myr is on the brink of civil unrest." Viserys nodded grimly. "I'll go see the district myself. We can't just hide the problem, it's better to show we handle it responsibly." Arrange for extra watch patrols to keep order, but be sure they don't use unnecessary brutality. The last thing we need is more resentment. He rode through the streets later that day, accompanied by a small guard. They ventured into the southwestern quarter, passing narrow lanes and cramped buildings that lacked the luster of Mir's wealthier neighborhoods. The occasional whiff of sewage or uncollected garbage reminded him that Mir's prosperity was unevenly spread. He saw boarded windows, sullen faces peering from doorways. A group of watchmen stood at a street corner, discussing the riot in hushed tones. When they recognized Viserys, they saluted, though some looked anxious. What happened exactly? Viserys asked the watch captain, a man named Arezzo who had a fresh bruise on his jaw. Agitators, my lord, Arezzo said. 3 or 4 men were shouting that the city's gold is spent on triumvirate warships while the common folk starve. They whipped the crowd into a frenzy. A few small fires were set, some looting. We managed to quell them, but it was close. The ringleaders vanished. Viserys looked around at the gloomy streets, heartsick at the prospect that Mir's own citizens felt abandoned. Were there actual hunger issues here? I thought the city had distributed relief after the war with Tyrosh. Arezzo's expression turned tight. Yes, but some relief never reached these blocks, or it was stolen. Corrupt local officials, maybe? Hard to track. Some folks here feel overlooked. Viserys swallowed a surge of frustration. If the triumvirate neglected its poorer districts, that negligence could be exploited by those who opposed his leadership. We'll increase oversight and ensure the relief efforts are properly managed. I'll personally speak with the Magister in charge of this quarter. For now, keep the peace, Captain. From there, Viserys walked on foot through the alleyways. His guards hovered protectively, but he insisted on seeing the damage, speaking to locals. Some spat curses, others asked for jobs or better living conditions. The negative sentiment simmered, but many recognized him, some bowed uncertainly. He did his best to reassure them that the city would not ignore their needs. He promised changes, more direct distribution of food and resources. He recorded grievances in a small ledger. Yet as he returned to his horse, he couldn't shake the feeling that these promises might ring hollow unless he acted swiftly. The next day, he gathered Tobin and a few sympathetic magisters. We must address the inequality fueling these riots, he said. We can't keep funneling coin only into warships and trade expansions for wealthy merchants. Let's establish a public works initiative to improve the southwestern quarter. Repair roads, ensure a stable water supply, create job programs. If we can do that, these agitators lose their leverage. Tobin agreed in principle, though some council members resisted the cost. Still, with Viserys pushing hard and the knowledge that the Braavosi bankers were observing, enough votes passed to allocate emergency funds. It was a small victory, but hopefully enough to defuse further violence. Marilena, of course, heard about the riot. She inquired discreetly if it indicated a larger unrest in Mir. Viserys explained the steps they were taking, emphasizing that the city's leadership was proactive in addressing the root causes. The banker's expression remained neutral, but she nodded once, as though filing away the information for her final report. A week later, Marilena summoned Viserys, Tobin, and a few high-ranking magisters to a private audience in the magisterial council hall. Soft sunlight slanted through tall windows as they gathered around a table strewn with documents. The Braavosi scribe stood by, face impassive. I thank you for your hospitality and your openness, Marilena said. The Iron Bank sees potential in Mir's growth and the triumvirate's regional influence. We are inclined to offer a new credit line, subject to certain conditions. Tobin's eyes gleamed with hope. We welcome the opportunity. Name your terms. Marilena produced a parchment bearing the bank's seal. First, the interest rate. We have set it at a moderate figure, factoring the risk. Second, repayment must be guaranteed by the triumvirate, not solely by Mir. I trust you can secure the signatures from Pentos and Lys. Third, we require that Mir maintain a stable environment for trade, which includes continuing your public works to mitigate civil unrest or providing a plan for it. The bank does not invest in cities on the brink of chaos. Viserys glanced at Tobin, who nodded cautiously. The terms were demanding but not unexpected. Persuading Lys and Pentos to co-sign might be a challenge, especially if they didn't stand to gain directly from all of Mir's projects. Still, it was doable, and the requirement to keep Mir stable aligned with Viserys' own goals. We'll need to discuss the exact details, Viserys said, but in principle we accept. It's beneficial for Mir and the triumvirate as a whole. Marilena allowed herself a thin smile. Then I believe we have the foundation of an agreement. I will finalize the paperwork in Braavos. Please join me there in a fortnight's time with the appropriate representatives from your allies. They shook hands, an understated gesture that nonetheless felt momentous. The Iron Bank's additional backing would bolster Myr's fortifications, help them address poverty and infrastructure, and ensure they could withstand any aggression from Tyrosh or beyond. Viserys felt a swell of cautious optimism. If he could keep this momentum, perhaps the triumvirate would grow so firmly entrenched that no faction, internal or external, could tear it apart. Yet as soon as Marilena and her Braavosi retinue departed, trouble darkened the horizon once more. A messenger arrived from the border near the disputed lands, breathless and dusty from hard riding. He brought news of renewed skirmishes, this time not from Tyrosh, but from raiders who bore no city banners. They had struck Myrish outposts, looted caravans, and vanished like ghosts. Worse, some witnesses claimed the raiders included fearsome beasts, half-tamed or mutated by whatever unnatural horrors roamed the old Valyrian roads near Mantaries. Rumors spoke of monstrous warhounds or pale, twisted creatures that could tear a man's limbs from his body. Most believed them exaggerated, but the attacks were real enough. Viserys reviewed the reports in his estate study, troubled by the descriptions of these marauders. The City Watch had never faced anything like it. Tobin, present for the briefing, slammed a fist on the table. If Mantaries is involved, that's no small threat. Mantaries is a foul place, half-ruined, steeped in twisted sorceries from the doom of Valyria. Whoever harnesses that city's sellswords might not abide by any civilized rules. Viserys thought of Tyrosh's rumored attempts to recruit forces from distant lands. Could these raiders be the vanguard of some alliance? Or perhaps they were independent brigands. Either way, Myr's border outposts were threatened. "We must respond quickly," he said. "Reinforce those outposts, gather intelligence on the raiders' origins. If Tyrosh is behind it, we'll have cause to confront them." Tobin nodded, but a flicker of unease lingered. "I'll summon Captain Hest and the city's other commanders. We need a strategy." While Tobin arranged military matters, Viserys dispatched urgent messages to Pentos and Lys, informing them of the raids. Pentos responded cautiously, pledging some support if the threat escalated. Lys, ever mercurial, wanted to confirm if Tyrosh was involved before committing resources. In short, Myr might have to fend for itself unless it could prove a direct link to Tyrosh. So Viserys poured himself into the effort to track the raiders, sending out scouts and employing local sellsword companies to guard caravans. He personally met with refugees fleeing the attacks, hearing their harrowing tales of night assaults, savage brutality, and glimpses of bestial creatures in the gloom. A particular account from a merchant named Lysiro, a trembling, middle-aged man with a bandaged arm, haunted Viserys. Lysiro described how the raiders wore mismatched armor and painted their faces in grotesque patterns, how they charged in with half-mad shrieks, accompanied by slavering hounds that looked diseased or mutated. Lysiro swore that one hound, bigger than a pony, tore through 2 armed guards before it was finally brought down by crossbow bolts. Viserys, though skeptical, saw genuine terror in the man's eyes. Could these be sellswords from Mantaries? Viserys asked gently, "Did you see any sigil or banner?" Lysiro shook his head. "No banners, my lord. But one of the raiders wore a cloak with a strange symbol like an inverted scythe. I don't know what it means. They only left us when dawn broke. We were lucky they didn't pursue." Viserys clasped the man's shoulder reassuringly. "You're safe in Myr now. We'll see that your wounds are treated and you're provided for. The triumvirate stands with you." After sending Lysiro to a healer, Viserys summoned Captain Goran Hest, who had led Myr's forces in the defense against Tyrosh. The tall, grizzled soldier arrived wearing a worried scowl. "I've heard these new reports, my lord. We can station more men at the outposts, but we need cavalry patrols. These raiders strike quickly and fade away. If they are indeed from Mantaries or the vile lands around it, we should be prepared for unusual tactics." Viserys rubbed the bridge of his nose, recalling the old stories of Mantaries, that vile city rumored to harbor men twisted by leftover curses from the doom of Valyria. Some said monstrous crossbreeds lurked there or that vile magics were practiced in secret. Perhaps these tales were exaggerated, but the real threat was bad enough. Can we set a trap? Lure the raiders into a location where we have the advantage? Hess considered. Possibly. If we send a caravan with goods they'd find irresistible, spices, precious metals, under heavy but concealed guard, we might ambush them. Viserys nodded. Let's plan it, but ensure minimal risk to innocent people. Use volunteer soldiers who know the risks, not common merchants forced into it. I'll start preparations at once." As Hest departed, Viserys found his thoughts drifting to the broader significance of these raids. If it turned out that Tyrosh had indeed hired these savage marauders, the triumvirate would have grounds to demand immediate accountability. If Tyrosh refused to answer, another war might erupt. And Myr was only just recovering from the last conflict. Worse, the Braavosi loan hinged on Myr's stability. War, or large-scale chaos, could rattle the Iron Bank's confidence. Before moving forward, Viserys decided to meet privately with Tobin. They sat in the orchard garden at dusk, golden light filtering through the trees. "This situation is precarious," Viserys murmured. "We can't let these raids continue, but if we discover a link to Tyrosh, it means another confrontation. The triumvirate might stand firm, or Lys might dither. We can't be sure." Tobin's face looked etched with worry. Archon Kalino might see an opportunity to pressure Tyrosh into trade concessions rather than joining a full war. Pentos might do the same. But Myr stands to lose the most if the raiders keep attacking our border. We should gather proof of Tyrosh's involvement if indeed there is any. Without that proof, Lys and Pentos won't commit wholeheartedly. Viserys gazed at the orchard's blossoms, remembering how not so long ago these trees had symbolized a tranquil new beginning. Now they framed the edges of a looming crisis. "I'll support the ambush plan. If we capture any raider alive, perhaps we can coax out the truth of who's funding them." Tobin nodded solemnly. "Let us hope so." In the days that followed, Captain Hest organized the caravan, in truth, a well-guarded trap of wagons loaded with valuable cargo accompanied by disguised Myrish soldiers and archers hiding beneath canvas. They traveled along one of the main routes near the disputed lands, a corridor frequently targeted by the raiders. Viserys waited tensely at a nearby outpost, ready to support them with reinforcements if a battle broke out. The hours dragged, the sun beating down upon the dusty land. Then, near midnight, a messenger galloped in, reporting that the raiders had taken the bait. Hest's men had engaged them in a fierce skirmish. Viserys immediately mobilized, leading a detachment to intercept any fleeing marauders. By the time he arrived, the fight was mostly over. The ground was littered with bodies, the wagons scorched, and a few outnumbered raiders were making a last stand under the moonlit sky. Viserys dismounted, sword at his side, scanning the scene. He noted men in ragged armor, faces streaked with blood and dirt. A guttural snarl drew his attention. Near one overturned wagon, a monstrous hound lay dead, large as a small horse, its jaws parted in a final, vicious grimace. He suppressed a shudder, reminding himself to remain focused. Captain Hest approached, cheeks flushed, a shallow cut on his forearm. "We managed to kill most of them, but 2 are taken alive. They've injuries, but they're breathing. Our healers can keep them alive for questioning." Viserys nodded, stepping carefully over debris. One captured raider, a sinewy man with a shaved head, lay propped against the wagon's side. His face was contorted in pain from a crossbow bolt lodged in his thigh. Another was a younger figure, maybe a woman, it was hard to tell in the darkness, bound at the wrists. Both glared defiantly as though not comprehending fear. Viserys knelt beside the wounded man, giving him a measured look. "You attacked Myrish caravans. Many innocents died. Why? Who sent you?" The man spat, snarling something in a thick accent that Viserys couldn't place. Hest gestured for a soldier to bring water. After forcing some into the raider's mouth, the man coughed, blinking. Viserys tried again, voice steady, though inside he felt a swirl of revulsion at the cruelty of all this. "We can tend your wounds if you speak truth. Otherwise, you'll die out here, alone." The raider's gaze flicked around, perhaps realizing his predicament. At last, he muttered a few words in low Valyrian, or some dialect close to it. Viserys caught fragments. Mantries, coin, orders, though the accent was distorted. He exchanged a glance with Captain Hest, who nodded grimly. Carefully, Viserys coaxed out a bit more information. The man claimed to be part of a clan from beyond Mantries, hired by envoys promising gold to raid Myrish roads. He mentioned a meeting with men who wore the colors of Tyrosh. Or so he believed. The men had bright teal sashes. Tyrosh's standard was teal-an orange, after all. Viserys' heart sank. This was proof enough if the man told the truth. Tyrosh, or at least some faction there, had recruited these savage brigands from near Mantries. Perhaps it was an unofficial arrangement designed to harass Myr without openly breaking the peace treaty. The second captive refused to speak, only growling curses at them, but the first man's halting confession might be enough. They carried the prisoners back to Myr, leaving the battlefield behind. Over the next few days, the Myrish Watch interrogated them further, though the raiders seemed difficult to break. They were half-wild, steeped in violence, and some were rumored to be under the influence of strange substances. Nonetheless, the partial admissions about receiving Tyroshi coin to strike at Myr were consistent. When Tobin and Viserys convened the magisterial council, the debate raged. Should they declare Tyrosh in violation of the treaty? Demand restitution? Prepare for war? Some council members urged caution, pointing out that these raiders were not wearing official Tyroshi uniforms. Tyrosh could claim they were rogues who merely used stolen sashes. Others, including Captain Hest, argued that in war or peace, Tyrosh had proven treacherous. Viserys listened carefully. At last, he spoke. We should not rush to war, but we cannot ignore this. Let us summon Tyroshi envoys, present the evidence, demand they halt any support for these raiders, and make amends to Myr. If they refuse, or if they dance around the truth, we'll have grounds to seek our allies' help. The council agreed. Letters were dispatched to Tyrosh, Lys, and Pentos. The Lyseni archons expressed outrage, genuine or feigned, and said they would back Myr's call for an investigation. Pentos also offered rhetorical support but remained vague about sending troops. Meanwhile, Tyrosh's official reply was a masterpiece of evasion. Their council of 34 claimed to know nothing of these brigands, insisted no Tyroshi official had funded them, and expressed polite regret that Myrish roads had been attacked. If criminals are using Tyrosh's name or colors, we condemn such acts, the letter concluded. Our city remains committed to peace. Viserys fumed inwardly. Even if some faction in Tyrosh had hired these marauders under the table, the city's official denial was predictable. They knew Myr lacked absolute proof beyond the testimony of half-savage raiders. Unless a Tyroshi official was caught in the act, the city of Hadras, capital of Tyrosh, could claim plausible deniability. The triumvirate could threaten war, but without a smoking crossbow, so to speak, it risked an escalation that might tear the region apart again. Caught between the possibility of unprovable Tyroshi sabotage and the need to maintain peace, Viserys decided to make one more move. He would lead a small delegation to Tyrosh itself, confront their leadership in person with the testimony, and gauge their reaction. If they refused to cooperate, he would at least be able to gather intelligence. Tobin was cautious but saw the merit. You must be careful, he warned. Tyrosh can be dangerous for an outsider, especially one they view as a threat. Viserys felt a flicker of trepidation. Memories of near-death experiences flitted through his mind, from the desert banishment under Khal Drogo to the Tyroshi battlefield. But he suppressed them. I have to show we won't be cowed. I'll go with a strong escort and with formal approval from the triumvirate. If Tyrosh truly wants peace, they'll host us safely. Thus, Viserys made preparations to travel, a modest retinue of Myrish guards plus a handful of advisors, including Captain Hest. He also reached out to Pentos and Lys, inviting them to send representatives alongside him, an official triumvirate delegation. Both cities agreed, though they sent only a few delegates each, perhaps not wanting to risk large numbers in Tyrosh. Before departing, Viserys penned a note to Illyrio Mopatis, who maintained connections throughout Essos. He requested any intelligence Illyrio might have on Tyrosh's internal factions just in case. The reply was cryptic, implying that certain Tyroshi merchant princes might be acting independently of the city's official council. Take care, Illyrio's note concluded. Tyrosh is a nest of vipers, each with its own venoms. 2 weeks after the decision was made, Viserys set sail from Myr's harbor. Their small fleet of ships bore the insignia of the triumvirate, hoping to demonstrate unity rather than aggression. The seas were calm, the sky a bright expanse. Viserys stood on the deck, the wind tugging at his silver-gold hair, the circlet of his office replaced by a more practical leather helm for the journey. He gazed back at Myr's receding skyline, feeling a pang of concern for the city he had grown to love. If anything happened to him, would the triumvirate hold together? They reached Tyrosh under a blazing sun. The city, perched on an island and various outcroppings off the coast, was a riot of color. Tall towers rose above the harbor, each one painted in stripes of brilliant teal and orange. The architecture had an almost whimsical flourish to it, but there was nothing whimsical about the war galleys that bristled with weapons near the docks. Tyrosh's famed dyes produced the bright colors for which the city was known, and their wealth from the stepstone trade routes financed the fortress-like defenses. The triumvirate ships were directed to a specific dock. As Viserys disembarked, he was greeted by a small welcoming party, a cluster of Tyroshi officials in flamboyant attire, mustaches curled and dyed in a dozen hues. Their leader, a portly man named Ramo Vaz, bowed with theatrical politeness. Welcome, my lords of Myr, Lys, Pentos. We are honored by your visit. I am Ramo, charged by the Council of 34 to receive you. Please, let us escort you to your quarters. Viserys mustered a polite smile. Thank you, Master Ramo. We come in friendship, hoping to clarify recent misunderstandings. Ramo gave an unctuous grin. Of course, misunderstandings abound in these troubled times. Let Tyrosh show you true hospitality. They were led through winding streets that displayed Tyrosh's trademark stripes on every facade. Despite the city's beauty, Viserys felt a simmering tension in the air. Passers-by stared with open curiosity or suspicion. Soldiers in teal and orange uniforms kept a watchful eye as the delegation passed. The lodging provided was a grand villa perched on a rocky hill overlooking the harbor, well appointed with plush cushions, decorative fountains, and airy balconies. Yet Viserys couldn't shake the feeling that every wall might have ears. That evening, a banquet was held in the council's hall, an imposing edifice of striped marble columns. The delegates, including Viserys, were seated at a long table brimming with exotic dishes, spiced fish, honey-glazed game birds, bright fruits from Sothorios. The Council of 34 arrived in a swirl of color and cologne, each member resplendent in dyed mustaches, each wearing a sash that matched or clashed in swirling patterns. They made a spectacle, but beneath the pomp lay cunning minds. Viserys greeted them politely, exchanging pleasantries, all the while waiting for the right moment to broach the subject of the raids. Partway through the feast, after the third course, the presiding council member, a tall, stern-faced woman named Soralia Veith, raised a gilded cup. We salute the triumvirate for forging peace in the region. Tyrosh has always desired peace with Myr, our noble neighbor. Let us toast to continued prosperity. The assembled guests dutifully lifted their cups. Viserys sipped politely, then set his wine down. May I speak plainly, council members? My delegation has come because Myrish caravans have been attacked by savage raiders who, we believe, were financed by elements within Tyrosh. We have partial testimony describing men in Tyrosh's colors paying these brigands coin. It's our hope that we can get to the bottom of this together to ensure no rogue faction undermines our treaty. A hush fell. Soralia's expression shifted to one of practiced dismay. Such accusations are grave, Lord Envoy. Tyrosh is not in the business of hiring bandits to assault Myrish roads. Do you have concrete proof? Viserys gestured to Captain Hest, who produced a parchment with statements from the captured raider. Soralia glanced at it, her lips pursed in distaste. A savage from the wastes near Mantries, can we trust such a statement? Perhaps he merely used Tyrosh as a scapegoat. Another councilman leaned forward, mustache dyed a shocking shade of purple. Tyrosh has many enemies. They could wear colors to cast blame upon us. You must see how easy it is for illusions to spread. The Lysine delegate, a slender woman named Helena Morath, spoke up. And what of the rumors that Tyrosh dispatched envoys to Mantries? We have heard such talk. If it's untrue, then deny it plainly. Soralia forced a smile. We dispatch envoys everywhere, business, trade negotiations, seeking new partners for commerce. If any ill-intentioned sells word twisted those dealings for personal gain, Tyrosh is also a victim of betrayal. We want to root out these criminals as much as you do. Viserys sensed the slipperiness of their position. They were stalling, disclaiming all responsibility. We propose a joint investigation, he said calmly. Allow Myrish or Triumvirate inspectors to question your mercenary captains, examine records of any coin that flowed from Tyrosh to Mantries. That way we can confirm or refute these allegations beyond doubt. A ripple of unease passed among the council. Clearly, they did not relish the idea of foreigners scouring Tyrosh's records. But to outright refuse might appear suspicious. Soralia pressed her lips together. We will consider your request. In the meantime, please enjoy our hospitality. Viserys recognized a dismissal. The rest of the evening passed in forced conversation and watery smiles. He left the hall feeling no closer to the truth, though the tension in the air felt thick enough to slice. They'll never let us see their records, Captain Hest muttered under his breath. Viserys nodded grimly. We'll see how it plays out. For now, keep an eye on your men. We're in the Viper's Nest. Over the next few days, the Council of 34 danced around the subject. EY insisted that any official inquiry would require bureaucratic measures, which in Tyrosh could take months. They also arranged a series of diversions. Tours of their famed dye works, sumptuous feasts, a demonstration of their city's trained sword-wielding monkeys, an odd Tyroshi spectacle. Viserys tried to keep the triumvirate delegates focused, pushing for a serious investigation, but Tyrosh's council always had some polite excuse to delay. One evening, after yet another unproductive meeting, Viserys took a solitary walk through the corridors of the villa they had been assigned. The architecture was ornate, with mosaic floors and carved pillars shaped like twisting serpents. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows. He found himself on a balcony overlooking the harbor. A warm breeze carried the scent of salt and strange Tyroshi perfumes. The city below was alive with torchlights, half shrouded in darkness. He wondered if war was inevitable. If Tyrosh was covertly attacking Mir, they would never publicly admit it. The triumvirate could be forced to respond militarily just to protect their caravans, plunging Essos into chaos again. And what would that mean for the Braavosi loan, for the tenuous stability he had built? He leaned on the balcony rail, letting the swirl of worries churn. A soft footstep behind him made him turn. It was one of the Lysine delegates, Helena Morith, the same who had challenged Tyrosh during the feast. She offered a small curtsy. "My Lord Targaryen, I did not mean to startle you, but I saw you out here." Viserys gave her a polite nod. "No harm done. The air is welcome after so much forced politeness indoors." She moved to stand beside him, her gaze on the flickering city lights. The triumvirate is in a difficult position. Tyrosh seems determined to hide whatever truth there is. If they funded those raiders, this could unravel everything. Viserys studied her face in the torchlight, searching for any hidden motive. But she seemed earnest, her brow furrowed. "You speak as though you care deeply about the triumvirate's stability," he said. A wry smile touched her lips. "Lys always stands to gain from stable trade. We might be fickle, but we're not suicidal. War benefits only the cell's words. Still, Archon Kalino and others in Lys will only commit so far. If Tyrosh keeps denying blame, we might do business with them instead. I suspect that's exactly what Tyrosh wants, to fracture the triumvirate." Viserys felt a cold dread. They might lure Lys away with deals, leaving Mir isolated again. Helena nodded slightly. "Yes, unless you find undeniable proof or present a stronger incentive for Lys to remain loyal to the triumvirate." She sighed, glancing at him. "I say this as someone who admires what you've built. You took a battered city-state and forged alliances that saved it. But alliances must be constantly fed and renewed, or they die." He couldn't argue with that. "I appreciate your candor. I will keep Lys's perspective in mind." She touched his arm gently, surprising him with the contact. "I truly hope you succeed. The alternative is too grim." Then she withdrew her hand, offered a faint bow, and slipped back into the villa's corridors, leaving Viserys alone with the shimmering starlight. That night, he slept fitfully, haunted by half-formed dreams of monstrous hounds and Tyroshi laughter echoing through empty halls. When dawn came, he rose determined to push the council harder. If they wouldn't allow an investigation, he would demand a direct audience with the city's leading power brokers. They could not keep prevaricating forever. But the day brought a twist he hadn't foreseen. As he and his retinue made their way to the council's hall, an urgent summons arrived. "Lord Targaryen, the council regrets to inform you that we must postpone today's meeting. An incident has occurred in the city that demands our immediate attention. We will send for you once the matter is resolved." Viserys scowled. Another delay or a subterfuge? Still, there was little he could do but wait. Hours passed and no further word came. Late in the afternoon, one of the Myrish soldiers standing guard at the villa's entrance flagged him down. "My lord, a local boy delivered this." He handed Viserys a small parchment sealed with a droplet of wax. Viserys broke it open, scanning the brief message. It read, "If you want real answers, come alone to the East Battery at moonrise. Tell no one. A friend." His first instinct was to dismiss it as a trap, but the mention of real answers pricked at him. Perhaps someone in Tyrosh's labyrinth of politics wanted to leak information about the raids or the covert funding. If he ignored the note, he might miss a chance to uncover the truth. On the other hand, going alone in a city full of potential enemies was reckless. Yet if he brought guards, his contact might vanish. After wrestling with the decision, Viserys resolved to risk it, albeit with caution. He quietly told Captain Hest he was going for a walk. "Follow me at a distance," Viserys whispered. "Stay hidden if you can, but be ready to intervene if I'm in danger. No large contingent, just a few men you trust absolutely." Hest nodded, frowning. "Be careful, my lord. Tyrosh is not known for gentle subterfuge." Night fell. The moon was bright, illuminating the city's rooftops in pale silver. Viserys left the villa, cloak drawn around him, hood low, and made his way through narrow streets. He headed east until he reached the outer ring of walls where old stone fortifications overlooked the sea. The East Battery was an older tower rumored to be partially abandoned since Tyrosh had built newer defenses. He slipped through an iron gate left ajar. Crumbling steps led up to a parapet. The sea wind gusted, smelling of brine. Torchlight from the city below illuminated portions of the walls, leaving pockets of shadow. Viserys' heart hammered. He glanced around, seeing no one. Perhaps this was a fool's errand. Then a figure emerged from behind a broken crenellation. "Lord Envoy Targaryen," said a voice, hushed but urgent. The speaker stepped into the moonlight, revealing a middle-aged man in a Tyroshi officer's cloak. His mustache was dyed dark green, but beneath that flamboyance lay tension in every line of his face. He held out empty hands to show he meant no harm. Viserys studied him warily. "You called me here?" "Yes, my name is Theros R'Lene. I serve in the Tyroshi garrison. I risk much to speak with you, but this cannot continue." "Speak plainly, then," Viserys said. "What do you know about the raids?" Theros glanced around, nervously checking for eavesdroppers. "They are indeed funded by certain men in Tyrosh. Not the entire council, only a faction. They want to weaken Myr, provoke you into rash action, so that the rest of the council can blame Myr for breaking the treaty. Then Tyrosh can claim moral high ground when the real war begins." Viserys felt a chill. "Who leads this faction?" A beat passed. Theros swallowed. "Soralia Veith is part of it. Ramo Vez too. They intend to unify Tyrosh behind a stealth campaign to sabotage Myr. Some of your caravans traveling by sea have also been targeted by pirates loyal to them. They plan to escalate until Myr either yields concessions or wages war in frustration." "Why are you telling me this?" Viserys asked, suspicious. "You said you serve in the garrison." Theros grimaced. "I do, but I don't want another full-scale war. My brother died in the last conflict with Myr. Tyrosh's pride kills our people just as it kills yours. Enough. I hoped that by warning you, you might corner them diplomatically or reveal their double-dealing to the rest of the council." Viserys' mind raced. If he had evidence of Sorelia's involvement, he could confront the council publicly. "Can you give me proof? Documents, records of coin, anything that I can show to the Triumvirate and the rest of Tyrosh's leadership?" Theros nodded, eyes flicking anxiously over the walls. "I have a letter bearing Sorelia's seal, instructing one of her agents to deliver gold to a known Mantarian contact. I stole it from the garrison's dispatches, but it's hidden in a safe place. If you meet me tomorrow at midnight near the old quarry outside the city, I'll bring it. We can't do it here. The risk is too high." Viserys weighed the risk. This was all too convenient. A second meeting out of the city where no one would see. It screamed of a trap. Yet if Theros was sincere, that letter was exactly what Myr needed, a conclusive piece of evidence. "I'll come," Viserys said, "but I won't come alone. I'll have a small escort, discreet." Theros' expression flickered, but he nodded. "I understand your caution. Just keep it small. If Sorelia's spies suspect anything, we're both dead." He stepped back into the shadows. "I must go. Find me at the old quarry an hour before midnight. I'll wait by a lone cypress tree." Before Viserys could answer, Theros vanished into the dark. Viserys let out a shaky breath. From behind another section of the wall, Captain Hest emerged. "I overheard," he said grimly. "Could be genuine. Could be a trap." Viserys stared at the moonlit sea, the waves glinting like shards of glass. "I can't ignore this possibility. If he truly has a letter from Soralia, that's the final piece we need. I'll meet him, but we'll plan carefully." He hardly slept that night, planning the approach to the old quarry. Hest would take a handful of the best soldiers, approach unseen, and keep watch in the distance, ready to intervene if things soured. Viserys would bring only one guard at his side to appear non-threatening. If Theros was on the level, they'd finalize the handover. If not, Hest would pounce. The next day passed in a haze. Tyrosh's council still refused official discussions, claiming the city was dealing with internal matters. Viserys counted the hours until nightfall. Finally, under a waning moon, he and his small contingent slipped out of the villa, carefully avoiding the main streets. They rode in near silence, the hooves of their horses muffled on dusty paths that wound inland. The old quarry was a disused pit where Tyrosh once mined stone for its grand walls. Overgrown and pocked with stunted trees, it lay in a lonely stretch of land. They arrived around midnight, dismounting behind a low ridge. Captain Hess positioned his men in hidden vantage points, crossbows loaded. Viserys and a single guard, a man named Andris, walked quietly toward the silhouette of a lone cypress tree standing near the quarry's edge. Bats fluttered overhead and the wind rustled the scrub. Viserys felt his pulse pounding, half expecting an ambush at any moment. A figure waited under the cypress tree, cloaked in black. As they approached, he stepped forward, Theros, if it was truly him. "Lord Envoy," he whispered. Viserys stopped a few paces away. "You have the letter?" Theros nodded, reaching inside his cloak. "Yes, in a hidden pocket. Here." He withdrew a small scroll sealed with wax. Even in the moonlight, Viserys could see a faint imprint that might be Ceralia's personal sigil, a stylized seashell. Theros extended it, hands trembling slightly. Viserys reached out, heart hammering. Suddenly, a sharp whistle broke the silence. Theros froze, eyes flaring with panic. Then, from the darkness, crossbow bolts whizzed through the air. One bolt struck Theros in the chest. Another streaked past Viserys' ear. Theros let out a strangled cry, staggering backward. Viserys dropped low, shouting for Andris to take cover. From the ridge, Captain Hest's men fired back. Chaos erupted in the moonlit quarry. Viserys scrambled forward, snatching the fallen scroll from Theros' limp hand. The man sagged against the cypress trunk, eyes wide with shock. "Jigo, take it." He rasped, blood staining his cloak. Then he slumped, unmoving. Viserys shoved the scroll into his vest, drawing his sword even though he could scarcely see beyond shifting shadows. Figures moved among the rocks, ambushers wearing dark cloaks. They fired another volley of bolts, forcing Viserys and Andris to duck behind a boulder. Hest's men responded with a volley of their own. Screams and curses echoed. Viserys heard the distinctive hiss of a sword leaving a scabbard. Men clashed in the gloom. "Stay low, my lord," Andris urged, brandishing a shield. A moment later, a dark shape lunged at them from behind a boulder, blade swinging. Andris parried the blow, and Viserys managed a desperate thrust with his sword, catching the attacker in the side. The figure collapsed with a gasping moan. Adrenaline surged through Viserys, and he forced himself to keep moving. Up on the ridge, Captain Hest shouted orders. More crossbow bolts sang. The ambushers seemed few in number, perhaps a half-dozen. After a few tense minutes of chaotic fighting, the night fell quiet again. A final pair of attackers fled, their footsteps fading into darkness. Hest descended, panting, a superficial wound on his arm. "All accounted for? My lord, are you hurt?" Viserys shook his head, still reeling from the close call. "I'm fine. Check on Theros." But it was too late. Hest knelt by the cypress tree, placing 2 fingers against the man's neck. He looked up, expression grim. "Dead." Viserys clenched his jaw. "At least we have the scroll." Carefully, he broke the seal, unrolling the parchment in the moonlight. The text was brief, but it bore Ceralia Veith's signature. It spoke of a payment to a man named Ortalo, apparently a Mantarian go-between, instructing him to deploy the assets to harass Myrish caravans. The text stated, "No survivors if possible. We must not appear implicated." It was damning. There was no question that Tyrosh was behind the raids, at least that faction. Hest read it over Viserys' shoulder, letting out a slow breath. "This is the evidence we need. But now we must get back to Myr safely." Viserys realized how vulnerable they were. The ambushers might be part of Ceralia's network, trying to keep this letter from leaving Tyrosh. "We'll return to the villa, gather our people, and sail at dawn. We can't stay here any longer." They quickly regrouped, leaving the dead behind, including Theros. Viserys felt a pang of guilt that the man had paid with his life to hand over this proof. But he suppressed the sentiment for now. His duty was to preserve the letter, expose Ceralia's treachery, and protect Myr. They rode fast under the moon's waning glow, alert for pursuit. By some stroke of luck or fear of further confrontation, no one followed. Before dawn, they reached the villa. The Lysine and Pentoshi delegates, awakened by the commotion, were stunned at Viserys' tale. Helene Morith looked horrified. "We must leave Tyrosh at once," she said, eyes darting. "Ceralia has proven she's willing to murder to protect her secret." They had no time to pack lavishly. Within an hour, the triumvirate delegation slipped down to the harbor, quietly boarded their ships, and set sail. Tyroshi guards on the docks seemed unaware of the events in the quarry, or perhaps Ceralia's men had not had time to alert them. As the sun rose over the striped towers, the triumvirate fleet cut through the waters, putting distance between themselves and the Viper's nest. Once safely at sea, Viserys showed the letter to the Lysine and Pentoshi representatives. Their reaction was unequivocal. This was a direct admission of guilt by a prominent member of Tyrosh's council. If made public, it would force Tyrosh to choose between disavowing Cerealia or risking condemnation by every city. Archon Kalino of Lys would have no excuse to waver. Pentos would likewise stand with Myr. Perhaps the Triumvirate might impose sanctions or demand Cerealia's removal. War might still loom, but at least Myr would not stand alone. They arrived in Myr to a subdued but urgent welcome. Tobin, waiting anxiously, exhaled in relief at their safe return. Viserys wasted no time. He convened the magisterial council, reading out the incriminating text. The council erupted in shock and anger. Even Magister Uller, who disliked the Triumvirate, condemned Tyrosh's duplicity. Rumors flew that if Tyrosh did not immediately surrender Cerealia to Myr's justice, the Triumvirate would blockade Tyrosh's harbors until they complied. Yet Viserys urged restraint, mindful that a blockade could spiral into a bloody confrontation. We must present this letter not just to the Triumvirate, but to the entire region. Let Tyrosh's other council members see the truth. They might remove Cerealia themselves to avoid war. We give them that chance, but we stand ready to act if they refuse. With that strategy in mind, letters were dispatched to Bravos, Lys, Pentos, and even Volantis, bearing copies of the incriminating scroll. The news spread like wildfire. Tyrosh's leading counselor had financed brutal raids against Myr. The moral scales tilted heavily in the Triumvirate's favor. Even the usually aloof Volantine Triarchs publicly disapproved of such underhanded aggression, though they made no move to support or oppose. Tyrosh's official response came swiftly. The Council of 34 insisted the scroll must be a forgery. They refused to extradite Cerealia, calling her a loyal public servant. Yet privately, messages trickled out suggesting that some Tyroshi counselors wanted to cut ties with her to salvage the city's reputation. Civil discord racked Tyrosh, with protests erupting, city factions forming around different beliefs of whether to support or condemn Cerealia. Meanwhile, the Triumvirate declared all Tyroshi merchant vessels subject to search if found near Myrish waters. Pentos and Lys joined the measure, effectively creating a partial blockade. Tyrosh's trade faltered, intensifying the city's internal pressure. For weeks, Essos hovered on the brink of a new war. Soldiers at Myr's border prepared for a Tyroshi retaliation that never came. Instead, Tyrosh sank into turmoil, its leadership paralyzed. Cerealia clung to power, denouncing Myr's letter as a forgery. Ramo Vaz tried to unite the council around her, but other members, fearing the Triumvirate's might, urged negotiation. A standoff ensued inside Tyrosh's own walls. Eventually, exasperated by the blockade and the city's plummeting revenues, a faction of Tyroshi councillors staged a dramatic coup within the Council of 34. Cerealia was arrested by her own peers, dragged before a hastily convened tribunal. A swirl of rumors claimed that she was found guilty of conspiring to violate the peace treaty, though some said the trial was little more than a scapegoating to placate the Triumvirate. Regardless, Ceralia's downfall was swift. The newly dominant faction sought to open direct negotiations with Myr, disclaiming Ceralia's actions as the work of a rogue official. Ramo Vaz fled into exile or was possibly assassinated, reports varied. When word of Ceralia's removal reached Myr, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the Triumvirate. Viserys and Tobin invited Tyrosh's new representatives to a summit in neutral territory where the Tyroshi apologized, agreed to pay reparations for the damage inflicted by the raiders, and reaffirmed the original peace treaty. They also agreed not to hamper Myr's caravans or shipping. In return, the Triumvirate lifted the partial blockade, allowing Tyrosh's trade to resume. War had been averted once more. In the aftermath, Viserys found himself hailed as the architect of a second triumphant diplomatic victory. By exposing Ceralia's treachery, he had safeguarded Myr's interests without plunging the region into total war. Even Magister Uller, who had once viewed him with deep suspicion, grudgingly admitted that Viserys had acted in Myr's best interest. Over time, Uller's objections mellowed, replaced by a guarded respect for the Targaryen who consistently delivered stability and prosperity. The Triumvirate's cohesion had never been stronger. Lys and Pentos, impressed by the success of the partial blockade, deepened their cooperation with Myr. Trade flourished, taxes rolled in, and the city's public works projects advanced steadily. Bravos, seeing how Mir had skillfully handled Tyrosh's duplicity, now finalized the new loan. Gold poured into Mir's coffers, fueling expansions that elevated the city's infrastructure. The southwestern quarter, once a hotbed of riots, benefited from newly paved roads, improved drainage, and job creation. Slowly, unrest waned. One bright morning, as Viserys strolled through the orchard estate, he inhaled the sweet aroma of orange blossoms and felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The path he'd walked since those desperate days, when all he had was a borrowed horse and a half-ragged cloak, led him here. A leader recognized in 3 major cities, forging alliances, defusing crises, shaping Essos in ways he once could not have imagined. And all without the savage illusions of rightful kingship that had nearly destroyed him long ago. He reflected on the cost. Good men like Theros had died to secure the truth. Soldiers on the border had laid down their lives. But for every life lost in these smaller conflicts, hundreds, thousands, were spared from the horrors of full-scale war. Viserys knew that if he faltered, if he succumbed to arrogance or apathy, everything might unravel. His role was not a throne of easy comfort but a seat of perpetual vigilance, requiring empathy, cunning, and a willingness to compromise. He passed beneath the canopy of leaves, the dappled sunlight dancing at his feet. A servant approached and bowed, extending a letter. "Arrived this morning, my lord." The courier was from Karth, of all places. Viserys' pulse skipped. Letters from Karth were rare. Curiosity piqued, he broke the seal. The script inside was elegant but unfamiliar. "Lord Viserys Targaryen, noble leader of the Triumvirate, word of your triumphs in Mir has reached Karth. I bring greetings on behalf of certain travelers recently arrived from the Dothraki Sea, who claim acquaintance with your noble house. They have told tales of dragons stirring again in Essos. I write in hopes of opening a dialogue, for there are forces in the east that might shape all our futures." No signature. Viserys' heartbeat quickened at the mention of dragons. Could it be Daenerys or someone who traveled with her? After all this time, it seemed the seeds of rumor, dragons stirring again, were sprouting in distant corners of the world. His mind raced. He thought of the letter Daenerys had sent him so long ago, referencing an ancient power she pursued. Had she awakened real dragons, as the legends prophesied? He closed his eyes, letting a wave of memory wash over him. Daenerys as a scared young girl forced into a marriage with Khal Drogo by his own scheming. He'd once threatened her, belittled her, but she had grown beyond his control, forging her own destiny. Even now, he felt a pang of guilt for the cruelty of his younger self. If she truly commanded dragons, how might she view his achievements here? Could they ever reconcile? Whatever the case, this letter from Karth was an invitation to open a new chapter of alliances or confrontations. Viserys' position in Essos was strong, but dragons, real, fire-breathing dragons, could upend all existing balances of power. Should he pursue this rumor, or focus on safeguarding the Triumvirate from more mundane threats like Tyrosh or Volantis? He reread the letter, weighing the possibilities. Then he tucked it inside his cloak, stepping deeper into the orchard. The path ahead was uncertain, but so it had always been. He had learned that forging a better world meant embracing the unknown, guided by the tempered steel of his resolve and the empathy he had discovered within. Perhaps, just perhaps, if dragons had returned, the Targaryen blood in his veins would guide him to a new destiny, one that would uplift not just himself, but all who placed their faith in the noble leader of Essos. The orchard blossoms swayed gently around him in the morning breeze. Standing amidst their fragrance, Viserys could almost believe that the ghosts of the old world, his father's madness, his own resentful boyhood, had at last been laid to rest. The dragons of old might be stirring again, but this time he would greet them not as a beggar king, but as a man of compassion and wisdom, ready to unite rather than terrorize. With that thought steadying his heart, he walked on, the circlet glinting in a shaft of sunlight, each step carrying him closer to the unknown future and the promise of a grander, nobler realm he had helped to forge.